My name is Elena Williams. I'm 29 years old. I spend my days in the quiet back rooms of an Ohio law firm, reading probate code and organizing county dockets. I am the kind of person who untangles the financial messes dead people leave behind. But 4 days ago, I woke up in a hospital bed with a cervical collar locked around my neck and the smell of my older sister Yu's expensive department store perfume suffocating the air. While I was trapped in a 4-day coma from a devastating car crash, my mother and my sister stood at the foot of my bed and stole $340,000 from me. They did not take it with a gun. They took it with a pen and a medical power of attorney. They thought I would just cry and let it go, because that is what I have always done. But they did not realize the legal weapon they left right in my hands. I will tell you exactly how they panicked when the trap snapped shut. But first, let me take you back to the moment I opened my eyes. Welcome to Cherry Drama Stories, where quiet women face loud betrayals and build their own justice. Tell me your age in the comments, and let me know if your family has ever crossed a line you can never uncross. The transition from the dark into the fluorescent glare of room 412 felt like surfacing through wet concrete. My vision swam out of focus before finally settling on the acoustic ceiling tiles. A rhythmic beep kept time near my left ear. My body felt impossibly heavy, pinned beneath stiff hospital blankets and the tight grip of fresh bandages across my ribs. Before I could even process the memory of the intersection, the screech of tires and the crushing impact of the truck that destroyed my car, my senses picked up a scent that did not belong in a trauma ward. Underneath the sharp clinical odor of iodine and bleach hung a heavy floral note. It was Sarah, a signature scent. I turned my head. The movement sent a sharp spike of heat down my spine. The cervical collar restricted me, forcing me to look straight ahead before I could angle my gaze toward the corner of the room. My older sister Sarah sat in the vinyl visitor chair, scrolling through her phone. Beside her stood our mother Linda, with her arms crossed, staring out the window at the gray Ohio skyline. Neither of them looked like women keeping a terrified vigil for a dying relative. They looked like people waiting in the lobby for a delayed flight. "You are awake," Mom said the words without turning away from the glass. She did not rush to the bedside. She did not reach for my hand or press a kiss to my forehead. She simply smoothed the front of her wool skirt and checked her watch. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. My throat felt like dry paper. "Water," I rasped. Sarah did not even look up from her screen. 4 days she murmured, her thumbs tapping out a rapid text message. "The doctor said you would be out for a while. T-bone collisions do a number on the brain. They were not sure if you would wake up this week." Mom finally turned from the window. She poured a small cup from the plastic pitcher on the rolling tray and handed it to me. The water was lukewarm, but it helped soothe the burning in my throat. I looked at the two of them. I read probate law for a living. I spend 40 hours a week watching families tear each other apart over dining room tables and life insurance policies. I know the exact cadence of bad news. I know the specific silence that fills a room when someone has done something they know they have to defend. "We need to talk about logistics," Mom said. Her tone carried the same brisk efficiency she used to organize the neighborhood block party or negotiate a lower price on a damaged piece of furniture. "While you were intubated, we had to make some decisions." I set the plastic cup down on the tray. My mind, trained by years of deciphering complex legal codes, pushed past the pain medication. "What decisions?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat. Sarah finally put her phone away. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and offered me a practiced, sympathetic smile. The kind of smile you give a cashier when a coupon does not scan. "Mom had to activate the medical power of attorney to manage your affairs. The hospital bills the insurance, all the administrative headaches." She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to assert her control over the room. "And Edith, us trust." Grandmother Edith had passed away 8 months ago. She was a practical woman who saw right through my sister's reckless spending habits. Edith left me a dedicated trust account containing $340,000. It was the only unencumbered liquid asset in our entire family. That fact had irritated Sarah since the day the lawyer read the will. "What did you do with Edith's trust?" I asked. I did not move. I just watched my mother's hands. Mom sighed. It was the universal mother-us sigh, meant to signal immense patience with an unreasonable child. I transferred it to Sarah. The monitor beside my bed maintained its steady, unbroken rhythm. I stared at them. I felt the cold realization wash over me, completely neutralizing the warmth of the pain medication. Sarah's husband was laid off. Mom continued speaking quickly now to preempt the argument she expected. They have 3 children, Elena. The private school tuition, the mortgage, the car payments. You rent a 1-bedroom apartment. You take the bus. You are single. You will be fine. She needs this more than you do. Just like that. A signature on a generic form executed while I was breathing through a plastic tube. They had used my medical crisis as a financial opportunity. Growing up in Ohio, you are taught that fairness and hard work are the foundation of a good life. You are taught to respect your neighbors and honor your family. But sitting in that hospital bed, I realized my family viewed my quiet, independent life as an excuse to rob me. Most people would scream. They would hit the nurse call button, demand the police, or dissolve into violent hysterics. But I live in the quiet, precise world of legal procedure. I know that screaming at entitled people is a waste of oxygen. Emotions do not win arguments. Documentation wins arguments. I shifted against the stiff hospital pillows, ignoring the terrible flare of pain in my chest. You transferred the funds, I said, verifying the facts for my own mental record, using the medical power of attorney. It is already done, Sarah said, leaning back in her chair, looking incredibly victorious. The bank cleared it yesterday. Mom walked the paperwork in herself. Do not make a scene, Elena. It is family money. It stays in the family. David and the kids need stability right now. I looked at the empty water cup. I did not shed a single tear. I did not beg them to reconsider. I did not ask how they could do this to their own blood. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and the woman I shared a childhood bedroom with, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, sharp clarity. I want a copy, I said quietly. Mom frowned, stepping closer to the bed. A copy of what? The bank statement, the wire transfer receipt. The original will, I replied, my eyes locking directly onto my sister's gaze. Grandmother Edith, A's original trust document. I want to read it. Sarah let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound bounced off the sterile walls. Why would you need that? I just told you the money is gone. The accounts are closed. You cannot undo it. I let her laugh. I let them both stand there feeling brilliant and untouchable. Because as a probate professional, I knew something they did not. They had only read the dollar amounts on the first page of the trust. They had not read page 34. They had completely overlooked the strict spendthrift provision, an ironclad legal clause that explicitly prohibits any assignment, transfer, or seizure of the beneficiary use funds without the direct, conscious, and notarized consent of the beneficiary themselves. A generic medical power of attorney cannot override a spendthrift trust in this state. The transfer was not just unethical, it was fundamentally illegal. It was wire fraud. They thought they were walking away with my future. They did not realize they had just handed me the key to their destruction. The discharge from the hospital took 2 more days of administrative friction. I rode home in the back of a medical transport van, watching the familiar gray skyline of my city roll past the tinted windows. Ohio is a state built on the quiet religion of industry. We measure people by their work ethic, by their refusal to complain, and by their adherence to a basic unwritten code of fairness. It is a polite, straightforward place. That cultural backdrop always made my family feel like a local anomaly. Walking into my apartment felt like stepping onto a different planet. The air was stale, holding the faint scent of the coffee I brewed the morning of the accident. The silence was heavy. I did not have a husband to fluff my pillows or children to distract me. I had a Boston fern dying on the windowsill and a stack of unread mail on the counter. I set my canvas hospital bag on the floor. Every movement required a calculation. The bruised ribs dictated how deep I could breathe. The cervical collar dictated where I could look. I walked to the kitchen island and unzipped the plastic pharmacy bag. 7 orange prescription bottles spilled onto the quartz countertop. I retrieved a plastic weekly pill box from the drawer. Monday through Sunday, 4 compartments per day. I sorted the hydrocodone, the muscle relaxers, the anti-inflammatories, and the antibiotics, with the exact same methodical precision I used to organize county dockets. Yellow pill in the morning slot, white pill in the evening slot. Snap the plastic lid shut. The sharp click of the plastic was the loudest sound in the room. I was managing my physical trauma the only way I knew how, by putting it into neat, legally defensible columns. As I worked, my mind drifted to the hospital room and the chilling ease with which my mother justified her theft. "She has children, Elena. You will be fine." That sentence was not a sudden burst of cruelty. It was the natural culmination of a dynamic that had governed our family for 3 decades. Sarah had always weaponized her status as a mother to extract financial favors from our parents. When Sarah's first daughter was born, Mom covered the down payment on their house. When Sarah's second child arrived, Mom paid off their credit cards. Motherhood, in Sarah's hands, was not a responsibility. It was an invoice submitted directly to our mother's checking account. And Mom paid it every single time. She bought into the illusion that Sarah's chaotic life required constant financial rescuing, while my quiet, self-sufficient existence required nothing at all. I did not ask for loans. I paid my own rent. I spent my evenings reading probate code and studying the intricate ways wealth transfers across generations. My independence became my penalty. Because I did not manufacture crises, my family decided I did not deserve a safety net. I finished sorting the pills. I swallowed the first dose with a glass of tap water and walked to my desk in the corner of the living room. It was time to see the actual damage. I opened my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow across my face. I navigated to the banking portal. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Hearing that you have been robbed is one thing. Seeing the digital proof is something entirely different. I typed in my password and pressed enter. The screen loaded. My checking account showed $3,000. My savings account showed $12,000. I scrolled down to the section labeled Inherited Trusts. The balance was 0.00. I stared at those digits. The cash had not just been requested. It had not just been processed. It had moved. The bank had honored the medical power of attorney without raising a single red flag. $340,000 of my grandmother U.S. legacy evaporated into the digital ether. My grandmother worked her entire life building that safety net. She designed it specifically for me because she knew exactly what Sarah was capable of. And now the safety net was gone. A soft chime broke the silence. My phone vibrated on the desk next to the keyboard. I picked it up. A text message illuminated the screen. It was from David, my sister, husband. "Hope you are healing up, Elena. Sarah told me they discharged you today. Let us know if you need anything. We are praying for a fast recovery." I read the words 3 times. I analyze text for a living, looking for the subtext hiding behind the ink. David is a practical man. He works as a mid-level manager at a logistics firm. He stresses over their mortgage and complains about the cost of youth soccer leagues. If his wife had just legally inherited over $250,000, his text message would not read like a generic greeting card. He would have offered to pay for a meal delivery service. He would have mentioned the windfall. He would have shown some sign of financial relief. He was oblivious. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sarah had hidden the theft from her own husband. She bypassed their joint accounts and funneled my inheritance into an individual account David could not see. This changed the entire landscape of the battlefield. This was no longer just a greedy sister securing a nest egg for her children. This was a rogue agent hoarding cash in the dark. It added a terrifying ticking clock to the equation. If David did not know about the money, it meant Sarah was not using it to pay off their visible household debts. She was moving it secretly. She was hiding it. And money hidden in the dark burns away very fast. I had to freeze the assets before she managed to spend it all on whatever shadow debts she was concealing. My first instinct, the human instinct, was to call my mother. I wanted to scream into the receiver. I wanted to demand she march back to the bank and fix the nightmare she orchestrated. But I pushed the human instinct down into the dark where it belonged. My mother had already made her choice. She chose the daughter with the children. Calling her would only give them a warning. It would give Sarah time to cover her tracks. I picked up my phone. I bypassed my mother U.S. contact card. I bypassed my sister U.S. contact card. I scrolled down to the letter C, Richard Cole. Richard is the senior partner at my law firm. He is 60 years old, wears suspenders, and possesses a mind like a steel trap. He taught me everything I know about the brutal, unforgiving architecture of probate law. The line rang twice before he answered. Elena, he said, his voice a low rumble, you are supposed to be resting. The firm will not collapse because you are recovering from a car wreck. I am not calling about work, Richard, I said. I kept my voice steady, stripping away any trace of pain or fear. I need a favor, a quiet one. The line went still. Richard knows me. He knows I do not ask for favors. What kind of favor, he asked. His tone shifted immediately from friendly boss to active legal counsel. I need you to pull a file from the county surrogate court, I said. My mother used a medical power of attorney to drain my trust account while I was in a coma. She transferred the entire balance to my sister. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. Richard was already taking notes. When did the transfer happen? 3 days ago. How much? $340,000. Richard let out a slow, measured breath. A medical POA does not grant authority to breach a protected trust, Elena. I know, I said, staring at the zero balance on my laptop screen, but the bank teller did not know that. They executed the wire. I need the official county filings. I need the exact document my mother signed. And Richard, I need you to draft an emergency injunction to freeze my sister's U.S. assets. You want to sue your own family? Richard asked. The question was not a judgment, it was a test of my resolve. No, I said smoothly. I want to audit them. I want the court to look at every single piece of paper they filed. They thought I would just cry and let them keep it. I need to show them how wrong they are. Give me 2 hours, Richard said. The paperwork trail starts now. I hung up the phone. I looked out the window at the city. The pain in my ribs throbbed, a steady reminder of the wreck I had survived. My family thought I was a casualty. They thought I was weak. They were about to learn that surviving a crash was nothing compared to surviving me. The intercom buzzer shattered the quiet of my apartment. The harsh electronic bleat echoed off the hardwood floors, making the dull ache in my skull throb in perfect synchronization. I pushed myself up from the desk chair, leaning heavily on the edge of the mahogany table to steady my balance. My ribs screamed in protest, but I forced my legs to move. 2 hours had passed since my phone call with Richard Cole. He promised the county filings would be delivered quickly, and Richard never missed a deadline. I shuffled to the front door and peered through the peephole. A courier stood in the hallway wearing a damp rain jacket and holding a thick sealed envelope. I unbolted the lock, pulling the heavy wooden door inward. The courier handed over the package without a word, requiring only a quick scrawled signature on his digital tablet. I closed the door and leaned my back against it, feeling the cold brass of the deadbolt bite through my cotton shirt. The manila envelope felt incredibly dense in my hands. It carried the physical weight of a closed legal trap. I walked slowly to the kitchen island, taking measured breaths to manage the searing heat in my chest. I raised the package and let it drop onto the court's countertop. It landed with a satisfying, heavy thud. 40 pages of densely packed estate documentation. 40 pages representing the sum total of my grandmother-us legacy and my mother-us deception. I pulled a pair of scissors from the drawer and sliced through the reinforced tape. The smell of fresh printer toner and stale filing room air drifted upward. I slid the stack of papers out, spreading them across the immaculate surface of my kitchen island. My hands were heavily bruised, the knuckles turning a mottled shade of violet from the steering wheel impact during the crash. Despite the physical damage, my fingers moved with practiced agility. I am a probate paralegal. Sorting through complex financial wreckage is the core of my professional existence. I bypassed the standard cover letters and the court clerk stamps. I needed to see the exact mechanism my mother used to orchestrate the theft. I found the asset transfer authorization form buried halfway through the stack. There it was. Linda's signature, rendered in her distinctive looping cursive, scrawled right on the bottom line. She had designated herself as the acting agent for my estate and authorized an immediate wire transfer of $340,000 into an account bearing Sarah's name. Attached to the back of the transfer authorization was the weapon she used to bypass the bank U.S. security protocols. It was a medical power of attorney. I leaned closer, scrutinizing the document. A cold wave of professional disgust washed over me. It was not a specialized document drafted by an attorney. It was a generic online template, the kind of cheap standardized form you can download for free from a discount legal website. The margins were misaligned. The font was a standard Arial, completely devoid of any official legal formatting. I could picture exactly how this played out. My mother has always possessed a formidable, demanding presence. She is a woman who speaks to retail managers using a tone that suggests they are already fired. When I was lying unconscious in the intensive care unit, Linda must have marched up to the hospital administration desk, brandishing this cheap printout. She likely bulldozed a tired, overwhelmed clerk into accepting the document to manage my immediate medical bills. But a hospital clerk is not a bank manager. How did she move the cash? I checked the signature line on the wire transfer receipt. It was processed by a mid-level branch supervisor at our local credit union, a man who has attended our family church for 2 decades. Linda had walked into his office, deployed a few strategic tears about her comatose daughter, and waved the hospital-approved power of attorney in his face. The supervisor, intimidated by her grief and her aggressive confidence, simply pushed the button. He bypassed the standard legal review process to help a weeping mother in crisis. They all looked at the dollar amounts. Nobody bothered to read the actual architecture of the trust. I moved the fraudulent transfer forms to the side and reached for the final document in the stack, Grandmother Edith's original trust agreement. Unlike the cheap internet printout my mother used, Edith Us, trust was bound in heavy blue legal backing paper. Edith was a woman forged in the steel mills of Ohio. She possessed a spine made of iron, and she trusted absolutely no one with her checkbook. Edith had watched my sister bankrupt 2 different small business ventures. She had watched my mother drain her own retirement savings to bail Sarah out of a disastrous mortgage on a house she could not afford. Edith understood that our family operated like a financial black hole, constantly consuming resources to feed Sarah Us lifestyle. When Edith designed my inheritance, she did not just leave me cash. She built a fortress around it. My bruised fingers flipped through the heavy pages, past the preamble, past the executor designations, past the standard tax distribution clauses. I knew exactly where to look. I turned the crisp paper, stopping precisely on page 34. Section 8, subsection C, the strict spendthrift provision. I traced the lines of text with my index finger, reading the dense legal jargon that my mother and sister had arrogantly ignored. No beneficiary of any trust created hereunder shall have the power to anticipate, encumber, assign, or transfer any interest in the trust estate. No part of the trust estate shall be subject to seizure, execution, or garnishment by any creditor of any beneficiary. Furthermore, no agent, representative, or individual holding a power of attorney shall have the authority to alter, distribute, or reassign these protected funds without the direct, conscious, and notarized consent of the beneficiary themselves. I read the paragraph a second time, letting the sheer, unbreakable strength of the wording settle into my bones. A medical power of attorney is designed to allow a surrogate to make healthcare decisions. It allows them to pay for a hospital bed or authorize a surgical procedure. In the state of Ohio, a generic medical proxy cannot override a multi-generational spendthrift clause. The law builds these specific provisions to protect vulnerable beneficiaries from creditors and, more importantly, from predatory relatives. My mother's signature on that transfer form was legally meaningless. The bank supervisor's authorization was a catastrophic procedural error. The transfer itself was void from the moment the ink dried. Linda and Sarah thought they had outsmarted me. They assumed that because I lived a quiet, unassuming life, I would simply fold under their authority. They assumed the law operated on the same emotional manipulation that governed our family dinners. They were wrong. I pulled a yellow legal pad from my briefcase and clicked a pen. I began drafting a timeline of their actions, cross-referencing the dates with the Ohio Revised Code. The implications of page 34 were devastating. By presenting a generic medical document to seize a protected financial asset, my mother had crossed a very dark line. This was no longer a simple family dispute over a grandmother us will. It was a blatant breach of fiduciary duty. It was wire fraud. It was grand theft. If I walked into a police station with this stack of papers, my mother and sister would be looking at severe civil penalties. They would be facing potential felony charges. The state of Ohio does not treat elder fraud or estate manipulation lightly. The courts destroy people who exploit comatose family members. I stared at the meticulous notes I had just written. A sudden, unfamiliar sensation bloomed inside my chest, completely erasing the lingering ache of my broken ribs. It was not sorrow. It was not the familiar sting of being overlooked by my parents. It was power. For 29 years I had played the role of the invisible, reliable daughter. I absorbed their slights. I paid my own way. I let Sarah consume all the oxygen in the room. But sitting at my kitchen island surrounded by irrefutable legal evidence, the dynamic permanently shifted. I was no longer a victim recovering in a hospital bed. I was a professional holding a loaded legal weapon aimed directly at the people who tried to ruin me. I did not need to cry. I did not need to confront them in a diner or shout at them over the telephone. I just needed to file the right paperwork and let the judicial system crush them under its own weight. I picked up my phone and opened a new email window addressing the message to Richard Cole. It was time to pull the trigger. The glow of the laptop screen cast a pale illumination across the dark living room. I sat rigid in my ergonomic desk chair. The medical collar kept my chin locked at a fixed angle, forcing me to pivot my entire torso whenever I needed to check a reference file on the secondary monitor. Pain radiated down my shoulder blades with every single keystroke, but I refused to stop typing. I was authoring a formal demand for accounting and a petition for emergency injunctive relief. In the state of Ohio, these filings are not gentle inquiries. They are legal battering rams designed to shatter locked financial doors. I formatted the document with exact margins. I cited the specific statute codes governing fiduciary breaches and unauthorized asset seizures. I attached the highlighted copy of page 34 from Grandmother Edith's trust, serving as the undeniable proof of their transgression. My mother and sister relied on tears and manufactured guilt to navigate the world. I relied on civil procedure. As my fingers moved across the keyboard, I thought about the countless times I had watched my mother orchestrate family conflicts. Linda was a maestro of the dining room table ambush. She controlled the narrative by cornering relatives in private spaces, wrapping her unreasonable demands in a thick layer of maternal concern. She thrived in the shadows of emotional manipulation, where facts were malleable and volume determined the ultimate winner. Whenever Sarah overspent her budget, Linda would corner our father or me, weaving a tragic tale of financial hardship to secure a bailout. I was taking her out of the dining room. I was dragging her into the harsh fluorescent light of the county courthouse. I finished composing the draft just before dawn. I saved the file, attached it to an encrypted email, and sent it to Richard Cole. I included a brief note requesting his signature as the attorney of record. 2 hours later, my cell phone vibrated. Richard called me directly. He did not offer a standard morning greeting. He jumped straight into the strategy. "Elena," he said, his voice a low rumble through the speaker, "I just read the petition. You did not leave them a single inch of breathing room." "I do not intend to, Richard," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "The medical power of attorney is a smokescreen. The spendthrift clause nullifies their entire transaction. I need that emergency injunction filed today." Richard hummed in agreement. He recognized the cold precision of the language, pointing out that I had crafted an airtight snare. He understood that requesting an immediate freeze on Sarah's banking portfolio was the most critical step. If Sarah attempted to withdraw the cash or transfer it to an offshore account, the local bank would freeze the transaction entirely. Richard printed the forms, signed his name on the bottom line, and dispatched a junior associate to file the paperwork directly with the probate clerk in downtown Cleveland. By noon, the trap was officially armed. The court issued the summons bearing the official seal of the Ohio judicial system. The legal notices were placed in thick brown envelopes and handed to the Postal Service, requiring certified delivery with a verified signature. The transition was complete. This was no longer a private domestic squabble over a dead relative's money. It was a matter of public record. A judge would now oversee every single penny. The waiting period required immense discipline. I spent the next 48 hours following my medical recovery plan. I applied ice packs to my bruised chest. I measured out my prescription doses with exact timing. I drank black coffee and watched the tracking numbers on the postal website update their status. The green certified mail slips are the great equalizers of the American legal framework. They do not care about your social status, your country club memberships, or your creative excuses. They demand a signature proving you have been officially served with notice. I knew exactly how the mail carrier would approach Sarah's suburban house. I could visualize the postal worker ringing the doorbell, interrupting her morning routine. Sarah spent her days cultivating an image of the perfect suburban mother. She drove an expensive sport utility vehicle she could not afford and hosted lavish birthday parties to impress other parents in her neighborhood. She needed my inheritance to fund that illusion, to keep the facade from crumbling. I pictured my mother signing for her envelope at her pristine townhouse, expecting an invitation to a charity luncheon, and receiving a devastating court summons instead. On Thursday afternoon, the tracking interface refreshed on my screen, showing 2 successful deliveries. 5 minutes later, the silence in my apartment shattered. My smartphone lit up on the coffee table. The caller identification displayed Linda's name. The device vibrated against the wood surface, buzzing like an angry hornet. I did not reach for it. I sat on my sofa, sipping my coffee, and watched the screen flash until the call diverted to voicemail. 10 seconds passed. The phone lit up again. This time, it was Sarah. The vibration hummed through the quiet room, rattling a pen against the coaster. I let it ring. For 3 decades, my role in this family was to answer the call. I was the reliable safety net, the quiet audience for their dramatic lives. When they demanded my attention, I supplied it. But sitting there, watching the missed call notifications stack up on the glowing screen, I felt the fundamental power dynamic of my life fracture and rebuild itself. I was no longer the discarded daughter. I was the plaintiff. The phone continued to ring. 5 missed calls, then 10, then 15. Frantic text messages began pouring in, illuminating the lock screen one after another. Elena, pick up the phone right now. We need to talk about this mail. Why are you doing this to my kids, Elena? Call me back. Stop this nonsense and answer the phone. Their panic seeped through the digital text. The pristine armor of their entitlement was cracking. They were realizing that their neat little financial heist had just activated an unavoidable legal machine. The courts would audit their accounts, trace the wire transfers, and demand accountability under penalty of perjury. They expected a tearful phone call where they could trick me into submission. Instead, they received a formal demand backed by the power of the state. I refused to grant them the relief of my voice. The silence on my end was deafening. It created a terrifying vacuum, leaving them alone with the realization that they could not bully a judge the way they bullied me. By denying them an audience, I forced them to sit in their own fear. They were locked in a cage of their own making, watching the walls close in around them. But I knew my sister better than anyone. Denied a private confrontation, Sarah would not simply surrender. She would turn to the only weapon she had left in her arsenal. She would spin a web of lies to our extended family, trying to poison the well before the court could speak on my behalf. The quiet phase of my investigation was over. The public smear campaign was about to begin. When you refuse to give an entitled person the reaction they demand, they will immediately seek out an audience who will validate their victimhood. The silence from my phone lasted exactly 12 hours. By Friday morning, the digital assault shifted tactics. Sarah realized she could not breach my walls directly, so she decided to burn the ground outside my apartment. I sat at the kitchen island, drinking black coffee and sorting my morning medications. The screen on my tablet illuminated. A notification popped up from a social media platform I rarely checked. Aunt Carol had tagged my sister in a public post. Carol was my mother's older sister. She was a woman who communicated entirely through covered dish casseroles and passive-aggressive internet quotes. I opened the application. The post featured an image of a sunset over a wheat field overlaid with a generic cursive font. True grace is found in family forgiveness. Greed is a disease that rots the soul. Praying for my nieces today. Below the image, the comment section was already a localized war zone. 3 cousins and a great-uncle had chimed in, offering their prayers for Sarah, us children, and expressing shock at my behavior. The narrative was taking shape in real time. My sister had been busy. I tapped the voicemail icon on my phone. 6 new messages. I pressed play on the first one. It was Uncle David, not to be confused with Sarah's husband. He was a retired auto mechanic who wore his heart on his sleeve and believed whatever my mother told him. His voice echoed through the speaker, heavy with disappointment. "Elena," he said, "we just heard what you were doing to your sister. Suing your own flesh and blood after you had that beautiful awakening in the hospital? Your mother told us you wanted to give that money away. She said you woke up from that coma and realized you needed to be closer to God and help the family. To change your mind now and drag them into court to take food out of those babies' mouths, it is just wrong, Elena. Call your mother and fix this. I stopped the playback. The audacity of the lie literally stole my breath, causing a sharp pain to ripple through my fractured ribs. A coma-induced religious awakening. Sarah had spun a masterclass of fiction. She knew she could not tell the family she simply took the cash while I was unconscious. That would make her a thief. So she crafted a story where I was a willing participant, a generous martyr who suddenly became a bitter, greedy villain the moment I returned to my empty apartment. The next voicemail was from my cousin Mark. He works as an insurance adjuster and prides himself on offering unsolicited advice at family gatherings. His tone dripped with condescension. Elena, he started sighing heavily into the receiver. We all know you have had a rough week, but you are not thinking clearly. Sarah told us about the spiritual epiphany you had. Giving up worldly possessions is a noble thought when you are facing death, but you survived. Now you are acting erratic. You cannot just gift a large sum of money to your sister and then try to sue her when you get bias remorse. The courts will laugh at you. You are tearing the family apart over a spiritual crisis. Drop the lawsuit before you embarrass yourself. In the Midwest, reputation operates as a tangible currency. Our specific corner of Ohio is a place where appearances hold immense weight. Neighbors judge each other by the neatness of their lawns and the quiet dignity of their struggles. To air a grievance in public is to admit a failure of character. Airing dirty laundry is considered a cardinal sin. Sarah understood the local culture perfectly. She was using it as a blunt instrument to beat me into submission. By casting me as the unstable, greedy antagonist, she ensured the community would rally to her defense. She was building a fortress of sympathetic relatives to shield her from the consequences of her fraud. The psychological warfare was incredibly potent. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to draft a scorched earth response. I wanted to upload the medical power of attorney and the spendthrift clause directly to Aunt Carol's page. I wanted to type out the exact timeline of the wire transfer, exposing the cold calculation my mother used while the doctors were still trying to stabilize my spine. I wanted to scream the truth until my throat bled. The stress response triggered a physical reaction. My heart hammered against my bruised sternum. A sharp spasm gripped the muscles in my neck, testing the limits of the cervical collar. The pain radiating down my left arm was a stark reminder of the trauma I had survived just a few days prior. I had been pulled from crushed metal and shattered glass. I had breathed through a ventilator. I closed my eyes and breathed through the anger. I looked at the stacks of legal files sitting on my mahogany table. I looked at the meticulous notes I had written on the yellow legal pad. I am a probate professional. I have sat in countless conference rooms, watching families destroy their own legal standing because they could not control their tempers. I have watched heirs lose millions of dollars because they sent an angry text message or posted a vindictive rant online, violating a judge's gag order or providing opposing counsel with evidence of instability. The cardinal rule of probate law is simple. Emotions lose cases, documentation wins them. If I engaged in the gossip, I would be fighting on Sarah's territory. She thrived in the realm of emotional chaos. She knew how to cry on cue and how to twist a narrative to make herself look like a persecuted saint. The moment I started arguing on the internet, I would validate her premise. I would reduce a serious financial crime into a petty sibling rivalry. The court does not care about Facebook posts. The court cares about the Ohio Revised Code. I deleted the voicemails. I logged out of the social media application. I put my phone on silent. I refused to let their manufactured outrage dictate my strategy. I would not expend a single ounce of my healing energy defending myself to people who never bothered to visit me in the trauma ward. Instead, I opened my email client and drafted a short direct message to attorney Richard Cole. I structured the message using the same precise, unfeeling language I used at the law firm. I stripped away the betrayal and presented only the tactical reality. Richard, the opposing party is attempting to escalate via social pressure and fabricated narratives. They are using extended family to apply emotional leverage. This indicates a high level of panic. I anticipate Sarah will realize her position is legally indefensible and will try to liquidate or transfer the stolen funds to an offshore or untraceable account before the preliminary hearing. Do not wait for their formal response to the certified summons. Proceed with the emergency freeze on all of Sarah's assets immediately. Execute the injunction today. Leave them no avenue of retreat. I hit send. The electronic swoosh confirmed the message was gone. By refusing to engage in the mudslinging, I forced Sarah to stay in the legal arena. She was trying to drag me into a public screaming match because she had no ammunition left in the courtroom. She possessed no valid defense against a breached spendthrift trust. Her only hope was to break my will before a judge could examine the paper trail. But my will was forged in the same quiet resilience that defined my grandmother Edith. They thought isolation would break me. They did not understand that isolation was my natural habitat. I had spent my entire life standing on the outside of their tight-knit, toxic circle. I was comfortable in the quiet. The emergency injunction hit the banking system like a seismic shockwave. I received a brief confirmation email from Richard, U.S. Junior Associate, at 2 p.m. The probate judge reviewed the spendthrift clause, viewed the unauthorized transfer documents, and signed the freeze order without hesitation. A court official served the local credit union Sarah's primary checking accounts, her savings accounts, and the newly created holding account containing my inheritance were instantly locked. The digital padlocks clicked shut. Her debit cards would now decline at the grocery store. Her automatic bill payments would bounce. The stolen $340,000 was frozen in place, trapped under an impenetrable judicial seal. Sarah thought she could control the narrative by turning my aunts and uncles against me. She did not realize that while she was busy writing fictional stories on the internet, I was busy cutting off her actual oxygen. The digital smear campaign was a desperate distraction. The real war was happening inside the bank servers. The fallout from the account freeze would not stay contained within the legal system. It was about to spill over into the real world. Sarah had hidden the theft from her husband David. She had hidden her massive spending habits and her shadow debts. By freezing the accounts, I was not just stopping a thief. I was lighting a fuse directly under her marriage. And when the pressure inside Sarah's house reached a boiling point, I knew my mother would be dispatched to clean up the mess. Linda would realize the phone calls and the internet gossip were failing. She would have to abandon her digital distance. She would have to come find me in person. Physical therapy was a master class in enduring, controlled agony. The clinic sat 3 blocks from my apartment building, offering a sterile environment, smelling of rubbing alcohol and heated rubber mats. For 2 hours, a specialist worked the rigid muscles framing my fractured ribs and manipulated the stiff tendons around my cervical collar. Every rotation sent a blinding flare of heat down my spine. I focused on the beige wall clock, counting the sweeping seconds, breathing through the sharp, localized fire. Surviving the trauma ward was only the prologue. The recovery demanded a grueling daily toll. When the session ended, I walked out into the crisp Ohio afternoon. The sky hung low and gray, threatening rain. My legs felt unsteady, shaking slightly from the physical exertion. Instead of calling a rideshare immediately, I walked next door to a small corner diner. It was a local fixture, with faded checkerboard floors, red vinyl booths, and the permanent scent of fried potatoes lingering in the air. I needed a moment of quiet isolation before returning to my empty apartment. I slid into a corner booth facing the entrance, taking extreme care not to twist my torso. A waitress, wearing a stained blue apron, dropped a thick ceramic mug on the table and filled it with steaming black coffee. I wrapped my bruised hands around the warm porcelain, letting the heat seep into my aching joints. The bell above the diner entrance chimed. I did not look up right away. I took a slow sip of the bitter roast. Then the ambient noise of the diner seemed to shift subtly. The clatter of silverware and low murmur of conversation faded into the background. I raised my eyes. My mother stood inside the doorway, scanning the room. She wore a tailored beige trench coat, her hair styled in an immaculate, rigid bob. She looked entirely out of place among the tired truck drivers and local construction workers occupying the counter stools. Her gaze locked onto my corner booth. Linda did not discover my location by accident. She knew my medical routine. She possessed a terrifying ability to track schedules and leverage logistics. When the digital smear campaign failed to provoke a response, she realized she had to corner me in a public space. She relied on the unwritten rules of polite society, knowing I would suppress my anger to avoid creating a humiliating scene in front of strangers. She marched across the checkerboard linoleum, her sensible heels clicking a sharp rhythm. She did not ask for permission. She slid into the opposite side of the red vinyl booth, placing her expensive leather handbag on the Formica table. She did not ask about my broken ribs. She did not inquire about the physical therapy session I had just endured. She did not even say hello. The waitress appeared holding the glass carafe. My mother ordered a decaffeinated coffee without looking at the woman. As soon as the mug was filled, Linda reached for a silver spoon and a paper sugar packet. She tore the packet open, pouring the white crystals into the dark liquid. She began to stir. Clink, clink, clink. The metal spoon struck the ceramic sides of the mug in a frantic, erratic tempo. The sound was jarring. My mother was a woman who prided herself on supreme, unflappable composure. She commanded charity boards and neighborhood associations with a steady, unwavering gaze. But right now, her knuckles were white. Her shoulders held a rigid, unnatural tension. The frantic stirring betrayed a deep, staggering panic. The frozen bank accounts had done their job. "You are making a terrible mistake, Elena," my mother whispered, leaning forward across the table. Her voice trembled, carrying the precise pitch of manufactured grief she utilized whenever she needed to bend reality to her will. I did not respond. I merely watched the coffee swirl in her cup. "Your sister is terrified," Linda continued, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "The bank notified her this morning. They locked everything, her checking, her savings, the joint account she holds with David. Her debit card declined at the grocery store. She had to leave a cart full of food at the register. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for her?" I took another sip from my own mug, letting the bitter liquid coat my tongue. The irony was profound. They stole $250,000 from my trauma bed, and they wanted me to feel sorry about a declined grocery transaction. "This is not a game, Elena," my mother pleaded, letting one single perfect tear spill over her eyelashes and track down her powdered cheek. She reached across the table, attempting to cover my bruised hand with her own. I pulled my hand back, resting it in my lap. Linda swallowed hard, retracting her arm. "We are family," she whispered, her tone growing urgent. "You cannot do this to your own sister. You have to call that lawyer of yours and withdraw the audit. Tell the judge it was a misunderstanding." I kept my facial expression entirely neutral. I tapped into the cold, clinical detachment I used when reviewing contested wills at the law firm. "You used a fraudulent medical proxy to bypass a spendthrift trust," I said, keeping my volume low and steady. "That is not a misunderstanding. That is wire fraud." Linda flinched as if I had slapped her. She leaned closer, dropping the volume of her voice to a harsh hiss. "You do not understand the situation. Sarah was drowning. The inflation, the mortgage rate hike, the private school tuition for the kids, she was falling behind on everything. She needed that money to survive." "Then she should have asked me," I replied. "She could not wait for you to wake up," Linda fired back, her desperation bleeding through the polished veneer. "The creditors were calling her daily. If you reverse this transfer, you will destroy her life. She has already spent $40,000 of that money, Elena." The diner around us seemed to vanish. My analytical mind seized upon that specific number, tearing it apart. $40,000. The wire transfer cleared less than a week ago. Nobody spends $40,000 on groceries and private school tuition in 5 days. That kind of rapid capital hemorrhage meant only one thing. Sarah possessed massive high-interest shadow debts. She must have been harboring secret credit cards, predatory personal loans, or a second mortgage in severe arrears. She drained my inheritance to extinguish those hidden fires before they consumed her pristine suburban life. And she did it all behind her husband's back. My mother watched my eyes, searching for a flicker of sympathy, a sign that her guilt trip was taking root. She thought the revelation of the spent money would force me to surrender. She assumed I would realize the cash was already bleeding away and decide the legal battle was too messy to pursue. She severely underestimated the mechanics of probate law. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us across the Formica table. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single ounce of daughterly affection. I spoke with the icy authority of a seasoned legal professional. "You breached your fiduciary duty, Mom." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. When you signed that transfer document, you acted as my agent. I continued maintaining unbreakable eye contact. You broke the law to steal my property. The probate court does not care about Sarah U.S. credit card bills or her tuition payments. The court will reverse the transfer, and when they see $40,000 missing, they will demand every single penny back. They will put a lien on Sarah's U.S. house, and if she cannot pay it, they will put a lien on yours. The transformation was instantaneous. The tears welling in my mother's eyes vanished. The trembling in her chin ceased. The mask of the desperate, grieving mother shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, revealing the cold, calculating fury underneath. She realized in that exact second that her emotional leverage was entirely gone. I was immune to her manipulation. "You are a selfish, ungrateful girl," Linda spat, her voice dripping with venom. The spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the table. "I gave you life. I raised you, and you are going to bankrupt your own family over a piece of paper?" "It is not just a piece of paper," I said, picking up my purse. "It is the law." I pulled a crisp $5 bill from my wallet and dropped it on the table to cover my black coffee. I slid out of the red vinyl booth, standing tall despite the screaming pain in my ribs. I looked down at the woman who had sold my future to fund my sister's lies. "Pay for your own coffee," I said. I turned and walked toward the diner exit. The bell chimed a cheerful, bright sound as I pushed the glass door open, stepping out into the cold Ohio air. I left my mother sitting alone in the corner booth, staring at the frozen reality of her own actions. The accounts were locked. The money was trapped, and Sarah's hidden financial rot was now fully exposed to the digital light. It was only a matter of time before the bounced checks and the frozen debit cards caught the attention of the one person Sarah had desperately tried to keep in the dark. David was about to find out exactly who he married. The rain finally began to fall as I unlocked the front door to my living space. The drops hit the window panes with a dull, rhythmic tapping, providing a strange comfort after the tense confrontation at the diner. I hung my coat on the brass hook, taking shallow breaths to accommodate the lingering pain in my ribcage. I walked into the kitchen and poured a fresh glass of water. The apartment was quiet, but the red indicator light on my cellular device was blinking a rapid, steady pulse against the dark wood of the coffee table. I picked up the device and tapped the screen. A new voicemail awaited me. It was not from my mother, and it was not from my sister. The caller identification displayed David's name. I pressed play and held the speaker close to my ear. Elena, the voice, crackled through the digital connection, sounding ragged and breathless. The background audio was filled with the distinct rush of highway traffic and the heavy hum of a vehicle engine idling. "I am sitting in my office parking lot. I just tried to log into the banking portal to pay our mortgage. The system locked me out. I called customer service thinking it was a security glitch. The representative told me our accounts are frozen due to a probate court injunction." David paused. I could hear him inhale a shaky, uneven breath. The representative also told me our joint savings balance was over $300,000. David continued, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Elena, I do not understand what is happening. Sarah is not answering her phone. Please call me back. Tell me this is some kind of massive banking error. Tell me someone stole our identity." I lowered the device and let the recording end. David is a practical man. He works as an operations manager for a Midwestern logistics firm. He spends his days tracking freight shipments, balancing ledgers, and ensuring delivery routes operate with maximum efficiency. He believes in spreadsheets and basic arithmetic. He met my sister in college and fell in love with her vibrant, outgoing personality, completely mistaking her financial chaos for charming spontaneity. For 10 years, he worked overtime to fund her pristine suburban lifestyle, believing her excuses whenever their credit cards reached the maximum limit. He thought she was merely a careless shopper. He had no idea he was married to a financial black hole. The injunction had done exactly what it was designed to do. By freezing the assets, the legal system had forcibly opened the ledger David was never allowed to see. I took a sip of water, letting the cool liquid soothe my dry throat. I did not want to ruin David's life. He was a decent father and a hard-working employee. But in the realm of probate law, collateral damage is often unavoidable. When you detonate a bomb inside a bank account, everyone holding a joint debit card feels the blast. I dialed his number. He answered on the very first ring. "Elena?" he said, exhaling my name like a man grasping for a lifeline. Thank God. Please tell me you know what is going on. The bank mentioned your attorney. They mentioned an estate audit. I sat down on the edge of my sofa, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I am sorry you had to find out from a customer service representative, David, I said, keeping my tone even and clinical. There is no banking error. There is no identity theft. Your wife stole my inheritance. The silence on the line was absolute. For several seconds, the only sound was the distant rumble of the highway traffic filtering through his car windshield. What are you talking about? David finally asked, his words stumbling over each other. Your inheritance, from your grandmother. Sarah told me that money was locked in a trust. She said it was inaccessible. It was locked in a trust, I replied. But while I was in a medically induced coma following my car accident, my mother used a generic medical proxy to bypass the security protocols. She authorized a wire transfer moving $340,000 from my protected account directly into an individual account bearing Sarah's name. David let out a sound that resembled a physical gasp. He was struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. But the bank, he stammered. How could the bank allow that? The branch supervisor failed to read the spendthrift provision on page 34 of the trust document, I explained, delivering the facts with cold precision. The transfer was entirely illegal. My attorney filed an emergency petition this morning. The probate judge reviewed the evidence and issued an immediate freeze on all assets connected to your wife. That is why your mortgage payment bounced. The court has seized control of your financial portfolio until every stolen dollar is accounted for. I listened as the reality of the situation crushed the man on the other end of the line. The pristine image of his perfect wife was disintegrating in real time. He was realizing that the woman sleeping next to him had conspired to rob a comatose family member. But $40,000 is missing, David whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. The bank representative said the balance was just under $300,000. Where is the rest of it? I closed my eyes, picturing the frantic, erratic stirring of my mother's coffee spoon at the diner. That is a question you need to ask your wife, David. He groaned a sound of pure, unadulterated defeat. She told me her parents gave her a small private loan last week. He confessed, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with brutal clarity. She said your mother wanted to help us clear the credit card debt before the holidays. She paid off the high-interest accounts and the private school tuition on Tuesday. I thought we were finally getting our heads above water. My mother did not give her a loan, I stated firmly. They raided a protected estate. They used my trauma to extinguish the secret debts she was hiding from you. The conversation shifted, taking a desperate turn. David realized the legal machinery was already in motion. He understood the implications of wire fraud and grand theft. He knew his family was standing on the edge of a precipice. Elena, please, he begged, his professional demeanor completely collapsing. I had no idea she did this. I swear to you, I knew nothing about it. If you pursue this audit, it will destroy us. The scandal alone will cost me my job. Please withdraw the injunction. I will figure out a way to pay you back. I will take out a second mortgage on the house. I will cash out my retirement fund. Just do not let this go to open court. Do not destroy my family over this. Hearing a grown man plead for his life is a deeply uncomfortable experience. My Midwestern upbringing urged me to offer comfort, to find a compromise, and smooth over the jagged edges of the conflict. But I was no longer playing by those rules. Compromise is what allowed my family to exploit me for nearly 3 decades. I cannot do that, David, I said, my voice devoid of any hesitation. Elena, I am begging you. I am not destroying your family, David, I said, delivering the final, devastating truth. Sarah destroyed your family the moment she signed that wire transfer receipt. She made a calculated decision to steal my future to cover up her own lies. I am just the person holding the receipt. I did not wait for his response. I lowered the device and ended the call. I placed the phone back on the coffee table. The screen went dark. The quiet of my apartment returned, replaced only by the steady drumming of the rain against the glass. Sarah had spent her entire adult life using the image of her perfect marriage and her beautiful children as a shield. She weaponized her status as a mother to demand endless financial bailouts from our parents, but that shield was now completely shattered. By forcing the legal system to freeze the accounts I had, stripped away her primary defense. She was now fighting a brutal two-front war. She faced an unwinnable legal battle against a ruthless probate court on one side and a catastrophic marital crisis inside her own home on the other. David would return from his office parking lot, demanding answers she could not provide. He would demand to see the ledger. He would demand to know how she could look him in the eye while hoarding stolen cash. She could no longer hide behind her fake religious awakenings or her passive-aggressive social media campaigns. The truth was out walking through her front door. But I knew my mother and sister would not surrender simply because they were caught. When entitled people are cornered, they do not apologize. They double down. They look for loopholes. They hire lawyers who specialize in muddying the waters. They thought they could outsmart the process. They did not realize that attorney Richard Cole was already preparing the next phase of the assault. The quiet phase of the investigation was officially over. The discovery phase was about to begin, and the legal system was preparing to demand every single text message, every single email, and every single piece of digital evidence they created while I was fighting for my life in the trauma ward. Richard Cole operates like a precision instrument. He does not waste motion, and he does not afford his opponents the luxury of time. On Monday morning, he initiated the formal discovery phase. The emergency injunction had stopped the financial bleeding, but discovery is how you win the actual war. He filed a motion for expedited subpoenas. The probate judge, recognizing the severity of the fiduciary breach, approved the request within the hour. I tracked the service of process through the digital court portal sitting at my kitchen island with a fresh cup of coffee. I knew exactly what was happening at my sister's house. A uniformed process server parked a modest gray sedan at the edge of Sarah's perfectly manicured driveway. Sarah lives in a highly restricted subdivision where the Homeowners Association dictates the exact shade of beige allowed on the mailbox and the permissible height of the front lawn. She curates this environment meticulously to project an aura of total stability and wealth. The process server walked up the stamped concrete path. He carried a stack of documents printed on crisp, heavy stock paper. The sheer physical weight of that paper communicates impending consequence. Sarah opened the front door wearing her designer athletic apparel, holding a ceramic cup of artisan coffee. She expected a routine package delivery or a neighbor stopping by to discuss a school fundraiser. Instead, the server asked to verify her legal name. He handed over the thick envelope, recorded the exact time of delivery on his digital ledger, and walked away without offering a single word of comfort. Inside that envelope were demands that would dismantle her curated existence, piece by piece. Richard did not just ask for recent banking statements, he issued a subpoena duces tecum, demanding all electronic communications between Sarah and Linda during the precise 96-hour window I lay unconscious in the trauma ward. He demanded text messages, email transcripts, cellular location data, and digital transfer logs. My family always believed their private conversations were untouchable. They operated under the arrogant assumption that hushed phone calls and deleted text messages vanished into the ether, leaving no trace. They did not comprehend the cold reality of digital forensics. When you commit a financial crime using a modern smartphone, you leave a permanent glowing trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to your front door. The panic must have set in the moment her eyes scanned the bold lettering on the first page. Sarah spent her entire life talking her way out of trouble. Our parents always accepted her spoken excuses, allowing her to rewrite history with a few well-timed tears. But the legal system does not listen to spoken excuses. The court only reads the paper. I sat in my apartment reviewing the case file while my ribs continued their slow, agonizing healing process. The deep purple bruises across my chest were fading into a dull yellow, but the pain required constant management. I received a brief encrypted message from Richard. He informed me through his network of local legal contacts that Sarah was frantically scrambling to secure defense representation. Driven by pure terror, Sarah scheduled emergency consultations with 3 different defense attorneys in the downtown area. I could picture her sitting in those polished, high-end law offices, deploying her usual manipulative tactics. She likely wept into a tissue, presenting herself as a devoted, desperate mother who made a minor administrative error while trying to save her struggling household. She probably framed the entire situation as a simple family misunderstanding blown out of proportion by a jealous younger sister. But lawyers who specialize in probate and civil litigation are immune to theatrical grief. They are trained to ignore the sobbing and look directly at the underlying documentation. During those consultations, the attorneys asked to see the trust agreement. Sarah handed them the paperwork. They flipped past the standard preambles and went straight to page 34. They read the spendthrift provision. They analyzed the generic medical proxy my mother used to authorize the wire transfer. The response from all three legal professionals was uniform and devastating. They recognized an indefensible position. They saw a clear, irrefutable breach of fiduciary duty intertwined with grand theft. Defending a client with a blatant digital paper trail requires hundreds of hours of billable work, usually culminating in a crushing courtroom defeat. None of those prestigious attorneys offered to take her case on contingency. They did not offer a shoulder to cry on. They demanded exorbitant retainers. One senior partner requested a $50,000 deposit just to enter an appearance on the court record. Another bluntly advised her to seek a plea deal before the district attorney decided to press felony charges. Sarah left those mahogany offices empty-handed and terrified. She had drained my inheritance to pay off her hidden debts, leaving her with zero liquid capital to hire a competent defense team. The frozen accounts meant she could not access a single dime to save herself. Her pristine suburban facade was cracking under the immense pressure, exposing the deep structural rot underneath. The tension shifted rapidly across the battlefield. I was no longer the grieving, injured sister trying to survive a tragedy. I was the architect of their impending ruin. The suffocating terror of their situation settled over their households. They were forced into a tight corner. Linda and Sarah had to confront the reality of their digital footprint. During those 4 days, while the hospital machines monitored my vital signs and regulated my breathing, my mother and sister were typing messages to each other. They were plotting the logistics of the wire transfer. They were discussing how to bypass the bank supervisor. They likely texted updates about my medical condition, treating my coma as a convenient window of opportunity. Did she wake up yet? The bank needs the proxy form. Hurry, before the doctors take her off the sedatives. Those electronic messages were now under a strict court order. If they deleted them from their devices, they would face immediate, severe penalties for spoliation of evidence. If they handed them over to Richard Cole, they would provide the exact prosecutorial proof needed to convict them of fraud. I poured myself a glass of water and walked to the window, watching the street below. My phone remained silent. David had not called back since our devastating conversation. The implosion inside their home was happening behind closed doors. Sarah was fighting an unwinnable battle against an unforgiving legal machine, while simultaneously trying to manage a marital crisis she could no longer hide. David was a man who valued honesty above all else. Finding out his wife was a thief was bad enough. Finding out she had orchestrated the theft while her sister lay dying in a hospital bed was a fatal blow to their vows. He would look at the mother of his children and see a stranger. The realization that they were out of options began to breed erratic behavior. When entitled individuals face inescapable consequences, they bypass logic and resort to desperate negotiation. They believe they can simply purchase their way out of accountability. They assume everyone has a price, and every grievance can be settled with a superficial apology and a fraction of the original sum. They thought they could buy my silence. They thought the prospect of a lengthy court battle would exhaust me. My mother was sitting in her pristine living room drafting a way out, trying to avoid paying the lawyers she could not afford. She was preparing to send an offer, hoping I was still the quiet, obedient daughter she raised. She was about to learn that my patience was gone and my silence was no longer for sale. The postal carrier dropped a thin, standard-issue envelope into my metal mailbox on Tuesday morning. Unlike the crisp, heavy-stock paper delivered by the process server, this parcel bore a crooked return address label and generic postage. It carried no official weight whatsoever. My mother had typed it herself. Cornered animals exhibit highly predictable behavior patterns. When a trap bites down upon a limb, they do not negotiate from a position of logic or strength. They barter using whatever flimsy leverage they falsely believe they still hold. I carried the sealed parcel upstairs to my kitchen island. The coffee machine hissed a steady rhythm in the background, filling the apartment with the scent of dark roast beans. My fractured ribs ached, a persistent thrumming reminder of crushed metal and deployed airbags. I slit the paper open using a dull butter knife. A single sheet of cheap printer stock slid out, landing flat against the polished quartz countertop. Linda had drafted a settlement proposal. She bypassed securing formal defense representation, refusing to pay the required retainer fees out of sheer stubbornness or perhaps an acute lack of liquid capital. Instead, she attempted to mimic the language of the courtroom, crafting a document fraught with glaring grammatical errors and improper syntax. I flattened the creased page. The text was incredibly jarring. She utilized antiquated words like heretofore and forthwith, placing them randomly within endless run-on sentences. The amateur legal jargon served as a pathetic veil covering a deeply arrogant core. The terms were laid out in a disorganized, bulleted list. My mother offered to return $150,000. That amount represented less than half of my stolen inheritance. In exchange for this partial refund, I was required to immediately withdraw the probate audit, drop all claims of fiduciary breach, and sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. This gag order explicitly prohibited me from discussing the matter with our extended relatives or any members of our local community. The final paragraph embodied classic Linda. She haughtily insisted this proposal constituted a highly generous compromise. She demanded I accept the terms immediately to protect our family reputation from permanent ruin. She was framing her offer as a profound favor. She robbed a comatose patient, then asked the victim to accept a severe discount to spare the thieves from public embarrassment. I walked away from the kitchen island, moving slowly toward the hallway bathroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh pale glow across the tile floor. I looked into the mirror mounted above the porcelain sink. The reflection staring back belonged to a survivor. A livid purple scar tracked across my collarbone, dipping below the neckline of my cotton shirt. Fading yellow bruises painted the skin around my jawline and neck. The physical toll of the collision mirrored the psychological wreckage my relatives had inflicted upon my life. Standing there gripping the cold edges of the sink, I felt the sudden, heavy temptation of profound fatigue. Lawsuits demand endless endurance. They devour your time, your energy, and your peace of mind. Taking the offered sum would instantly halt the agonizing machinery of the judicial system. It would end the sleepless nights. It would vanish the looming, stressful depositions. I could secure a portion of my grandmother's legacy, cut ties with my toxic upbringing, and walk away into a quiet, peaceful existence. A pragmatic, analytical mind always evaluates the cost of continuing a prolonged war. Accepting the fraction meant saving myself months of grueling litigation and expensive attorney fees. It offered a clean, immediate exit from the chaos. But a deeper, older instinct rebelled violently against that arithmetic. I traced the jagged edge of the scar on my collarbone. This dispute transcended mere currency. The core issue rested on the sheer audacity of their entitlement. For nearly 3 decades, I accepted the emotional scraps my family threw in my direction. When Sarah wrecked her first vehicle, our parents bought her a newer model, while I rode the public transit bus to my university classes. When Sarah maxed out her credit cards, purchasing designer clothing, our mother drained her own savings to rescue her, while I worked double shifts at the law firm to pay off my student loans. My role was to remain invisible, asking for nothing and expecting less. This settlement letter was just another scrap. It was an expectation that I would shrink myself to accommodate their comfort. If I signed her crude document, I would validate their actions. I would signal that my boundaries were perpetually negotiable. Taking the fraction meant accepting that they possessed the inherent right to tax my existence. It meant allowing Sarah to keep nearly $200,000 of stolen wealth to fund her pristine, fraudulent suburban life. A non-disclosure agreement would grant them explicit permission to control the narrative, forever spinning tales of my supposed greed while they quietly enjoyed the spoils of my personal tragedy. They wanted me to absorb their guilt. They wanted me to purchase their forgiveness using my own stolen legacy. I returned to the living room, leaving the poorly typed letter discarded like trash on the countertop. I opened my laptop, illuminating the dim space with a harsh blue glow. I did not bother parsing the ridiculous clauses or highlighting the spelling mistakes for a counteroffer. I did not need to negotiate with amateur thieves. The Ohio legal system operates on rigid compliance. We do not barter over felonies. I opened my email client and initiated a new thread directed to attorney Richard Cole. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, feeling the cool plastic beneath my fingertips. The physical pain in my chest dulled, replaced by a surging, relentless wave of resolve. I was not just fighting for a bank balance. I was dismantling an entire lifetime of calculated disrespect. I typed a single sentence. Decline the offer and proceed immediately to deposition. I pressed send. That swift electronic transmission sent a massive shockwave back to the suburban house where my sister and mother cowered. The quiet, obedient paralegal they assumed they could effortlessly crush had permanently vanished. In my place stood an immovable, relentless legal force. They had fired their last desperate shot attempting to purchase a cheap retreat. I just burned the bridge, leaving them stranded on the wrong side of the river. Their amateur tactics had failed completely. The unyielding machinery of the discovery phase would now grind forward without mercy. The next time we faced each other, it would not be across a diner table or through a misspelled letter delivered by the postal service. It would be in a stark, windowless conference room. They would be forced to raise their right hands, swear an oath to the state, and answer brutal questions under the unforgiving penalty of perjury. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Richard Cole's law firm was designed to intimidate. It offered no warmth. The walls were painted a blinding, stark white. A massive mahogany table stretched 15 feet across the center of the space, polished to a mirror finish. At the head of the table sat the court reporter. Her fingers hovered over the keys of her stenograph machine. The rhythmic clicking of those keys sounded like a metronome, counting down to an inevitable execution. Clack, clack, clack. Every single breath, every defensive stutter, and every frantic lie was about to be permanently etched into the official legal transcript. The heavy glass door opened. My mother and sister walked into the room accompanied by a frazzled attorney who wore a poorly fitted suit and carried a disorganized leather briefcase. They had managed to scrape together enough cash to hire a discount defense lawyer, but his defeated posture suggested he already knew this battle was lost. Linda took a seat directly across from me. For 3 decades, this woman controlled the emotional temperature of every room she entered. She hosted family dinners like a commanding general, dispensing passive-aggressive critiques alongside the side dishes. She tried to deploy that same maternal authority now. She leveled a furious, piercing glare in my direction, expecting me to shrink away. I did not blink. I did not look down at my hands. I held her gaze with cold, unblinking detachment until she awkwardly shifted her eyes toward the window. Richard Cole adjusted his spectacles. He did not engage in polite small talk. He signaled the court reporter to go on the record. He began by establishing the basic facts verifying identities and confirming that both women understood the severe penalties of perjury. Under oath, a conference room ceases to be a place of negotiation. It becomes a diagnostic laboratory where falsehoods are surgically extracted. Richard opened a thick black binder. He slid a laminated copy of Grandmother Edith's original trust across the smooth mahogany surface. He instructed my mother to turn to page 34. Linda hesitated. Her manicured fingers gripped the sharp edge of the paper. Richard asked her to read Section 8, subsection C, out loud for the record. Linda cleared her throat. She attempted to project her usual confident tone, but the dense legal jargon acted as a snare. No beneficiary of any trust created here, under, shall have the power to anticipate, encumber, assign, or transfer. She read her voice, catching on the unfamiliar terminology. She stumbled over words like garnishment and fiduciary. The polished, articulate woman who dominated neighborhood council meetings sounded suddenly small and profoundly ignorant. She butchered the pronunciation of irrevocable. The pristine mask was slipping. The court reporter typed every single hesitation. "Do you understand what that clause means?" Richard asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. My mother adjusted her posture, defensive and cornered. "It means the money is protected," she answered vaguely, "but I possessed a medical proxy. I was acting in her best interest." Richard did not raise his voice. He simply turned a page in his binder. He retrieved a second document, sliding it next to the trust agreement. "This is a time-stamped receipt from the local credit union," Richard stated. "It shows a wire transfer of $340,000 authorized by your signature. The transaction occurred at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday." He then produced a third document. The header displayed the logo of the Regional Trauma Center. "This is my client's medical chart," Richard continued. "At precisely 2:14 on that exact Tuesday, Elena was in the intensive care unit. Her breathing was regulated by a mechanical ventilator. Her spine was immobilized. She was heavily sedated under a medically induced coma." The rhythmic clicking of the stenograph machine filled the heavy silence. "You marched into a bank and signed a legally void transfer while your daughter was intubated," Richard summarized, weaving the facts into an inescapable noose. "You bypassed a strict spendthrift provision to siphon $250,000 into your older child's checking account." The discount defense attorney cleared his throat, attempting a weak objection regarding relevance, but Richard waved him off with a dismissive flick of his wrist. The objection was meaningless during a fact-finding deposition. The conflict playing out across the mahogany table was entirely psychological. Richard was systematically stripping away the protective layers of their manufactured excuses. They could no longer claim this was a simple administrative error or a generous family favor. The paper trail painted a portrait of predatory theft. Richard shifted his focus. He turned his piercing gaze toward Sarah. My sister had remained unusually quiet, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests of her leather chair. She looked like a trapped animal, realizing the perimeter fence was electrified. Richard opened a separate file folder. Through the expedited discovery process, our legal team had obtained Sarah's financial records. The subpoenas had unearthed the shadow ledger she tried so desperately to hide from her husband David. "Let us discuss the destination of these stolen funds," Richard suggested. He placed a stack of credit card statements and loan origination documents on the table. "You claimed the money was necessary to provide stability for your children. You claimed you needed to pay tuition and secure your household during an inflation crisis." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but her throat betrayed her. No sound emerged. "These records tell a very different story," Richard continued, tapping a manicured finger against the bank statements. "They show $30,000 in high-interest credit card debt accumulated from luxury retail purchases and expensive vacations. They show a predatory personal loan taken out 6 months ago, currently in severe arrears. They show you were 90 days behind on your primary residential mortgage." The illusion of the perfect suburban mother evaporated into the sterile air of the conference room. For years, Sarah had utilized her children as a convenient shield, a socially acceptable excuse to demand endless financial rescues. She wrapped her greed in the noble cloth of motherhood. But the numbers did not lie. She did not steal my inheritance to buy groceries or pay for youth soccer leagues. She stole my future to finance a fraudulent lifestyle she could never afford. Under the immense, crushing pressure of perjury, Sarah finally cracked. The pristine facade crumbled entirely. She buried her face in her hands and began to weep. It was not the theatrical, performative crying she usually deployed to manipulate our parents. It was a guttural, ugly sound born of profound terror and absolute defeat. "I had to," she sobbed, her voice muffled by her trembling hands. "David did not know. He would have left me if he saw the debt. The creditors were calling my phone every single hour. They threatened to foreclose on the house. When Mom said Elena had that trust fund sitting there untouched, I panicked. I just needed to clear the balances before David found out." The court reporter's fingers danced across the keys, capturing every syllable. Clack, clack, clack. The truth was raw and devastating. It was stripped of all polite Midwestern justifications. My sister had sacrificed my financial security to save her own marriage from her own lies, and my mother had willingly handed her the knife. The admission of guilt hung in the air, heavy and permanent. Sarah had just confessed on the record under oath to knowingly participating in the misappropriation of protected funds to cover hidden personal liabilities. I sat across from them feeling a strange, hollow calm. I had spent my entire youth believing their narratives. I believed I was the difficult one, the daughter who needed to earn her place by remaining quiet and demanding nothing. Watching them unravel in this sterile room, I realized they were never strong. They were just loud, and loud people always crumble when forced to speak the verifiable truth. But the deposition was far from over. Confessing to the debt destroyed their moral high ground. Confessing to the mechanics of the transfer, however, was about to cross a much more dangerous threshold. Richard had established the timeline. He had established the motive. He was now preparing to spring the final trap. The civil audit was brutal enough, But when Richard reached into his briefcase for the next piece of evidence, the stakes were about to escalate beyond mere financial restitution. Sarah and Linda thought the worst possible outcome was simply returning the cash. They were about to learn that lying on a bank authorization form carries consequences that cannot be solved with a checkbook. The shadow of the district attorney was creeping into the room, and a terrifying word was about to be spoken out loud. The sound of Sarah weeping filled the sterile air of the conference room. It was a pathetic, hollow noise. For my entire life, tears were the ultimate currency in our household. A well-timed sob could erase any transgression and secure an immediate pardon from our parents. But a deposition is a hostile environment where emotional currency holds zero value. The court reporter did not offer a tissue. She simply typed the phonetic representation of my sister breaking down under oath. Richard Cole allowed the weeping to continue for 30 excruciating seconds. He understood the psychological weight of an uninterrupted breakdown. The discount defense attorney sitting next to my family looked physically ill. He shuffled his disorganized files, refusing to make eye contact with anyone at the table. He knew his clients had just torpedoed their own defense. Richard finally broke the silence. He did not raise his voice to speak over the sobbing. He simply pushed a fresh document across the mahogany table. He aimed it directly at my mother. Linda had remained frozen during Sarah's confession. Her pristine, rigid posture had collapsed into a rigid, terrified slouch. She looked at the paper sliding toward her as if it were coated in poison. Let us return to the primary mechanism of this transfer. Richard said, his tone conversational, but laced with lethal intent. This is the medical power of attorney you presented to the bank's supervisor. You downloaded this template from a discount legal website, correct? Linda swallowed hard. Her throat clicked audibly in the quiet room. Yes, she whispered. Her voice lacked its usual commanding volume. You need to speak up for the record, Richard instructed, tapping his pen against the legal pad. Did you download this form? Yes, I did, Linda said louder this time. Her eyes darted toward her useless defense lawyer, seeking a lifeline that did not exist. Richard nodded slowly. Please examine the bottom of the second page. Is that your signature affixed to the document? My mother stared at the blue ink. She recognized her own looping cursive. Yes, she confirmed. Excellent, Richard said. Now please direct your attention to the third paragraph on that same page. It is located under the bold heading labeled Agent Limitations. Read that paragraph out loud for the court reporter. Linda hesitated. The color completely drained from her powdered face, leaving a chalky pale mask. She opened her mouth, but the words refused to form. Read the paragraph, Mrs. Williams, Richard commanded, stripping away any trace of polite professional courtesy. My mother looked down at the paper. Her eyes scanned the text, and a look of pure, unadulterated horror washed over her features. She realized exactly what she had signed. The agent acting under this authority, Linda read, her voice shaking so violently the words barely registered above a whisper. The agent shall have no authority to make gifts of the principal U.S. property to themselves, to their creditors, or to their immediate family members. Any such transfer constitutes a direct breach of fiduciary duty and is strictly prohibited by law. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a steel trap snapping shut around a leg. You transferred $340,000 to your immediate family member, Richard stated, resting his hands on the polished wood. You utilized a document that explicitly forbade that exact action. You signed an attestation claiming you understood these limitations. I did not read the fine print, Linda stammered, grasping for any available excuse. I was worried about my daughter. I was in a rush. The bank supervisor told me it was fine. Ignorance of the fine print is not a valid legal defense, Richard replied, his voice as cold as ice. The bank supervisor committed a procedural error, but you committed an intentional act of deception. You presented a document establishing a fiduciary duty to a comatose patient, and you immediately violated that duty to enrich your other child. Beside her, Sarah attempted to reach for a glass of water, resting near the center of the table. Her manicured hands were trembling uncontrollably. She wrapped her fingers around the smooth glass, but she lacked the fine motor control to lift it safely. The glass tipped forward. A torrent of ice water spilled across the pristine mahogany surface. The liquid pooled around the legal documents, soaking into the margins of the transcript. Sarah gasped, pulling her hands back as if the water were scalding hot. She stared at the spreading puddle, her chest heaving with erratic, ragged breaths. Richard ignored the spill. He leaned forward, locking his gaze onto my mother and my sister. "This proceeding is currently a civil audit," Richard explained, adopting the tone of a strict professor delivering a final, devastating lecture. "My client filed a petition to recover stolen assets. However, you must understand the jurisdictional mandates governing this state. When a civil investigation uncovers verifiable evidence of blatant estate fraud exceeding $100,000, the probate judge no longer has the discretion to keep the matter private." He paused, letting the threshold amount hang in the chilled air. "The court is legally obligated to refer cases of massive financial exploitation to the district attorney," Richard continued. "The theft of over $250,000 using fraudulent authorization crosses state banking lines. It triggers mandatory reporting laws designed to protect vulnerable individuals. We are no longer simply discussing restitution. We are discussing a criminal referral for a felony offense." The word felony dropped onto the mahogany table like a live grenade. The shift in power was absolute and irrevocable. A civil lawsuit means losing money. A civil lawsuit means ruined credit and public embarrassment. But a felony conviction means the total obliteration of a life. It means wearing a uniform that is not purchased at a designer boutique. It means losing the right to vote. It means sitting in a concrete cell while your children grow up without you. Sarah burst into genuine, ugly tears. The sound was visceral and horrifying. The pristine suburban mother who hosted lavish neighborhood parties and drove a luxury sport utility vehicle was suddenly confronting the very real prospect of a prison sentence. Her manicured hands covered her face, smearing her expensive makeup into dark, chaotic streaks. She wailed, mourning the death of the fraudulent life she had built. Linda sat beside her, completely rendered speechless. For the first time in 29 years, my mother had absolutely nothing to say. There were no manipulative arguments left to make. There were no guilt trips she could deploy to change the facts. She had marched into a bank, feeling brilliant and entitled. She now sat in a conference room, realizing she had single-handedly orchestrated the destruction of her favorite child. I sat quietly on my side of the table, watching the catastrophic consequences of their greed crush them in real time. The yellow bruises on my neck ached slightly, but the pain felt incredibly distant. For my entire life, I believed that defending myself required shouting. I thought setting boundaries meant engaging in endless, exhausting arguments that I would ultimately lose. Watching the two women who tormented me crumble under the weight of the Ohio Revised Code, I realized a profound truth. I did not need to yell. I did not need to hurl insults or seek petty personal vengeance. I just needed to step aside and let the law do the punishing. The judicial system is a massive, unfeeling machine. My family had arrogantly stuck their bare hands directly into the gears, assuming the machine would stop for them. They were currently being ground into dust. The discount defense attorney hurriedly passed a box of tissues to Sarah, frantically whispering into his client's ear. He was likely advising her to invoke her right to remain silent to avoid further self-incrimination. The deposition had yielded everything Richard needed and more. The paper trail was verified, the motive was confessed, the intent was documented. Richard Cole closed his thick black binder. The satisfying snap of the metal rings echoed loudly. "We have what we need," Richard announced, signaling the court reporter to conclude the official record. "You will receive a copy of the transcript. I suggest you retain competent criminal defense counsel immediately." I stood up from my chair, taking careful, measured movements to protect my healing ribs. I looked down at the puddle of water soaking into the cheap defense files. I looked at my mother staring blankly at the wall. I looked at my sister sobbing uncontrollably into her wet hands. I felt no pity. Pity is reserved for victims of circumstance. They were victims of their own malicious choices. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them trapped in the stark white space. The legal execution was complete, but the societal fallout was just beginning. The deposition transcript would soon become a matter of public record. The digital smear campaign they launched to destroy my reputation was about to collide violently with the verified truth. The aunts, the uncles, and the judgmental cousins who left me angry voicemails were about to read exactly what happened while I was breathing through a ventilator. The fortress of lies was coming down. The legal system possesses a terrifying memory. When a deposition concludes, the spoken words do not simply evaporate into the chilled air of the conference room. The court reporter takes her stenograph tape and translates the phonetic keystrokes into a bound, certified document. That document is then filed directly into the county clerk as digital archive. Probate courts operate on absolute transparency. Once an exhibit enters the official docket, it ceases to belong to the private individuals involved. It becomes public property, available for anyone possessing an internet connection and a minimal filing fee to review. My family failed to anticipate this mechanism. They assumed the humiliating confessions extracted by Richard Cole would remain permanently sealed behind the mahogany doors of the law firm. They operated under the delusion that wealth and prestige could mask their moral bankruptcy. They were disastrously mistaken. The truth always seeks the path of least resistance. In a Midwestern community, gossip travels faster than a winter storm front. It only took 48 hours for the verified facts to breach the walls of Linda's curated existence. Cousin Mark, the insurance adjuster who previously left me a condescending voicemail demanding I drop the lawsuit, inadvertently triggered the collapse. Mark prides himself on his amateur legal knowledge. Driven by morbid curiosity and a desire to prove me wrong, he accessed the county court database. He paid the small administrative fee and downloaded the newly filed deposition transcript. He expected to find a judge throwing out a frivolous lawsuit filed by a bitter sibling. Instead, Mark read the brutal, unredacted reality. He read the exact timeline of the wire transfer. He read the cross-examination detailing my intubated state in the intensive care unit. He read the undeniable proof of Sarah U.S. massive hidden credit card liabilities. He read my mother U.S. forced admission that she utilized a generic online template to bypass a multi-generational spendthrift clause. Mark did not keep this revelation to himself. Shock is a highly contagious emotion. He immediately forwarded the PDF document to Aunt Carol, Uncle David, and the rest of the extended family network. The manufactured narrative of my supposed religious awakening completely disintegrated. The illusion of the generous martyr sister acting erratically was replaced by the cold, hard evidence of predatory theft. The relatives who had confidently weaponized their self-righteous indignation against me suddenly found themselves standing on the wrong side of a documented felony. My cellular device, resting on the kitchen counter, began to vibrate. It was Thursday morning. The sky outside my window offered a brilliant, clear blue, a stark contrast to the oppressive gray weather of the previous weeks. I picked up the phone. A text message illuminated the lock screen. The sender was Aunt Carol, the same woman who posted passive-aggressive quotes about family forgiveness on social media just a few days prior, was now frantically backtracking. "Elena," the message read, the digital text lacking any of its former haughty confidence. "We just saw the court papers Mark found. I am so incredibly sorry. We had no idea what Linda and Sarah actually did. They lied to all of us. They told us you wanted them to have the money. Please forgive me for what I said. Call me when you feel up to it. We love you." I read the words twice. I did not feel a sudden rush of vindication. I did not experience a warm wave of familial reconciliation. I felt entirely numb to her apology. Carol did not seek the truth when I was lying in a hospital bed. She blindly accepted the most convenient story because it allowed her to maintain her comfortable worldview. Her apology was not born of genuine remorse. It was born of deep, acute embarrassment. She realized she had publicly backed a criminal, and she wanted to quickly erase her own complicity. I swiped left on the notification deleting the message without sending a reply. The fallout, radiating through our specific corner of Ohio, was absolute. The state is frequently associated with the loud neon attractions, like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, drawing tourists to the northern shores. But the true cultural fabric of the heartland relies on a much quieter foundation. Our communities are built upon honest living, paying your debts, and maintaining a modest, respectful demeanor. Linda had spent her entire adult life exploiting that exact cultural fabric. She served on the charity boards, she hosted the prestigious neighborhood book clubs, she positioned herself as a pillar of moral authority within her local congregation. That authority evaporated overnight. When Sunday morning arrived, Linda attempted to attend her regular church service, hoping to project a brave face and weather the storm. She wore her best tailored suit and carried her leather-bound Bible. But polite society possesses a uniquely devastating method of delivering punishment. No one screamed at her in the sanctuary. No one caused a dramatic scene in the vestibule. Instead, they delivered a total, suffocating silence. As Linda walked down the carpeted aisle, the parishioners physically turned their shoulders away from her. The women, who normally greeted her with warm embraces, suddenly found the hymnals incredibly fascinating. The pastor offered a stiff, awkward nod, refusing to engage in his usual friendly banter. When Linda sat in her customary pew, the family occupying the adjacent seats quietly stood up and relocated to the opposite side of the room. She was excommunicated without a single word being spoken. The social death was instantaneous and permanent. Linda was forced to sit in the chilling isolation she created, realizing that her pristine reputation was forever stained by the undeniable label of a thief. Sarah faced a similar brutal ostracization. The suburban mothers who previously envied her lavish birthday parties and her expensive sport utility vehicle now viewed her with deep suspicion and disgust. The news of her hidden shadow debts and her willingness to rob a comatose sister spread through the school pickup lines like wildfire. The playdates were abruptly canceled. The neighborhood association invitations stopped arriving in her mailbox. Sarah was completely isolated, trapped inside a heavily mortgaged townhouse she could no longer afford. More voicemails flooded my inbox throughout the week. Uncle David left a long, rambling apology sounding close to tears. Several cousins reached out offering excuses for their previous behavior. They all expected me to grant them absolution. They wanted the quiet, reliable paralegal to smooth over the jagged edges of their guilt. I handled their apologies with the exact same stoicism I used to handle their insults. I ignored them. I did not post a triumphant response on the internet. I did not call my mother to gloat over her ruined social standing. Engaging with their shame would only drag me back into their chaotic emotional orbit. I understood a fundamental truth about human nature. Silence and patience are far more devastating than a screaming match. By refusing to acknowledge their apologies, I denied them the closure they desperately craved. I left them to sit quietly with the uncomfortable reality of their own failures. My focus remained entirely analytical and forward-looking. Social ruin might feel satisfying to a vindictive heart, but social ruin does not replenish a stolen trust fund. The accounts were still frozen under the emergency injunction. The cash was trapped in a digital purgatory. The deposition had destroyed their defense, but the legal machinery still required a formal resolution to return the assets to my control. Sarah and Linda were completely cornered. They had no money to fight a prolonged court battle. They had no community support to lean on. They faced the terrifying looming threat of the district attorney initiating a felony fraud investigation. The pressure inside their respective homes was reaching a critical, explosive threshold. They had only one move left to play. They had to raise the white flag. I sat at my kitchen island reviewing the latest email from Richard Cole. The discount defense attorney representing my family had just contacted our firm. The panicked lawyer was practically begging for a meeting to discuss an unconditional surrender. The final phase of the recovery was about to commence, demanding a total capitulation that would strip away the last remaining ounces of their arrogant pride. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, sharp chill in the air. The sky over the Ohio landscape hung clear and bright, burning away the lingering gray clouds of the previous week. I sat at my kitchen island, measuring out my reduced dosage of pain medication. My fractured ribs no longer screamed with every single inhalation. They had settled into a dull, manageable ache, a physical reminder of the trauma that was slowly losing its grip on my daily routine. The physical healing of my body mirrored the shifting momentum of my legal battle. The poisonous elements were being purged from my system. My phone buzzed against the polished quartz countertop. The caller identification displayed Richard Cole's name. I tapped the screen to answer the call. Richard did not bother with pleasantries or trivial morning greetings. He delivered his updates with the sterile efficiency of a surgeon completing a successful operation. The opposing counsel formally waved the white flag. Richard announced, his voice a low, steady rumble through the speaker. Facing the looming shadow of the district attorney and the terrifying prospect of felony indictments, the defense lawyer begged for an unconditional surrender. They offered a total capitulation to avoid a criminal referral. Richard outlined the exact parameters of the proposed settlement. The emergency injunction we filed had successfully preserved $300,000 of my grandmother's U.S. legacy. The defense agreed to release those frozen assets immediately, transferring every single cent back into a secured trust under my exclusive control. The primary bulk of the stolen inheritance was safe. But the remaining $40,000 presented a unique logistical hurdle. Sarah had already incinerated that cash, paying off her secret high-interest credit cards and her delinquent residential mortgage. She possessed zero liquid capital to reimburse the stolen funds. Her accounts were drained, her credit was ruined, and her husband had locked down his own separate finances. In a typical family dispute, this deficit might trigger a negotiated discount. A weary victim might forgive the missing fraction just to end the exhausting, chaotic conflict and walk away. I refused to forgive a single penny. The principle of the theft mattered far more than the currency itself. Richard understood my boundary without needing an explanation. He crafted a ruthless legal mechanism to recover the missing $40,000. He drafted a property lien directed specifically at my mother, us primary residents. Linda owned a pristine 4-bedroom house in a highly sought-after suburban subdivision. She valued that property above almost anything else in her life. It served as the physical monument to her curated social standing, the perfect venue for her neighborhood committee meetings and her prestigious book clubs. By forcing Linda to execute a lien against her own sanctuary, we established a profound permanent consequence. My mother had enabled my sister us reckless greed for 3 decades, always utilizing other people's resources to cover the damages. Now Linda was forced to leverage her own equity to pay for the theft she helped orchestrate. The mother would literally pay for the sins of the daughter. Furthermore, Richard demanded both women sign a confession of judgment. This specific legal instrument is a devastating tool in civil litigation. It requires the signatories to formally admit their liability on the permanent court record. It strips them of any future ability to appeal the decision or file retaliatory lawsuits against the plaintiff. A confession of judgment acts as an unassailable shield, protecting the victim from any subsequent legal harassment. It forces the guilty parties to swallow their pride and document their own moral failure in black and white. The execution of these demanding documents required a final physical gathering. I traveled downtown to the law firm later that afternoon. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer that carefully concealed the fading yellow bruises along my collarbone. I walked into the same stark, windowless conference room where the disastrous deposition had occurred just days prior. Linda and Sarah were already seated at the polished mahogany table. They looked like hollow, empty shells of the women who had stood over my hospital bed. Sarah kept her eyes fixed firmly on her lap, refusing to look in my direction. Her designer clothing hung loosely on her frame. The stress of her collapsing marriage and her impending financial ruin had visibly aged her. David had reportedly moved into a temporary rental apartment across town, leaving her entirely alone in the heavily mortgaged townhouse she fought so ruthlessly to protect. Linda sat rigid and pale. The fierce, commanding aura she used to terrorize neighborhood charity boards had vanished. She looked small and frail. The public humiliation inflicted by her church congregation and her former social circle had drained the vital energy from her posture. She was a woman who had lost her captive audience and her perceived moral authority simultaneously. The discount defense attorney slid a thick stack of finalized paperwork across the vast expanse of the table. He pointed a trembling finger at the signature lines demarcated by bright yellow adhesive flags. Linda picked up a heavy black fountain pen provided by the law firm. She hovered the metal nib over the pristine white paper. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, staring at the stark legal language detailing her profound failure. Then she pressed the pen to the page. The conference room was deathly quiet, magnifying every ambient noise. The scratchy, defeated sound of the metal nib scraping across the heavy stock paper echoed in the sterile, chilled air. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was not just the auditory footprint of ink binding a legal contract. It was the physical sound of my mother signing away her last ounce of pride. She was legally admitting she was a thief. She was placing a financial shackle around her own cherished home. She finished the cursive signature and pushed the document away rapidly, as if the paper itself were burning her fingers. Sarah picked up a cheap plastic ballpoint pen and signed her name on the corresponding lines. She did not hesitate or read the clauses. She moved with the frantic, hurried pace of someone desperate to escape a collapsing building. They both signed the confession of judgment, cementing their guilt into the permanent archives of the Ohio judicial system. The defense attorney gathered their executed copies and placed them into his disorganized leather briefcase. He offered a stiff, uncomfortable nod toward Richard Cole. My mother and sister stood up from their leather chairs. They walked toward the heavy glass door, moving in tandem. Neither of them offered an apology. Neither of them spoke a single word to me. I watched them leave the conference room, walking out into a harsh reality where they possessed zero leverage and zero credibility. I declined Richard's offer to celebrate the victory over an expensive dinner at a downtown steakhouse. I requested the original executed files and carried them back to my apartment. The evening sun cast long golden shadows across the hardwood floor of my living space. The ambient noise of the city hummed a steady, comforting rhythm outside my window. I placed the heavy manila folder on the quartz countertop of my kitchen island. I brewed a cup of herbal tea, moving with a fluid grace that had been absent since the devastating car collision. My body was finally healing. The deep tissue damage was repairing itself, knitting the torn muscles back together. My mind felt incredibly sharp, unburdened by the constant heavy weight of their toxic expectations. I opened the folder and reviewed the finalized paperwork. I traced my fingers over the dark blue ink of their signatures. In cinematic portrayals, these moments of victory are usually accompanied by a soaring orchestral score and dramatic slow-motion camera angles. The protagonist achieves justice, and the world celebrates in a loud, triumphant chorus. Real life operates differently. There was no triumphant music playing in my apartment. There was no grand applause. There was just the quiet, satisfying rustle of perfectly drafted legal documents. I picked up my own pen and signed my name on the acceptance lines, formally closing the dispute. I secured my inheritance and permanently severed the chains of their emotional manipulation. The agonizing legal war did not end with a spectacular, dramatic explosion. It ended exactly the way it began, with a single, quiet signature on a piece of paper. The heavy lifting of the civil audit was finished. The stolen funds were legally assigned back to my control. The only step remaining was to present these signed confessions to the probate judge for the final formal decree. The justice system requires a concluding ritual, and the court was preparing to deliver one final devastating reprimand on the official record. The architecture of the Cuyahoga County Courthouse commands immediate respect. The floors are constructed from thick slabs of polished marble. The ceiling arches high above the gallery, painted with murals depicting justice and equity. Tall windows line the eastern wall, allowing beams of pale morning sunlight to slice through the heavy atmosphere. Tiny dust motes dance inside those shafts of light, swirling in the quiet air. I stood at the plaintiff table, wearing a sharp navy suit. For the first time in weeks, my neck was completely bare. The rigid medical collar was gone. The fractured ribs that previously dictated my every movement had finally healed into a dull, forgotten memory. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs completely without a single flinch of pain. I was physically repaired and legally invincible. Across the center aisle, sitting at the respondent table, my mother and sister looked like entirely different human beings. The vibrant, arrogant energy they carried into my hospital room had been completely extracted. Linda wore a muted gray cardigan that seemed to swallow her frame. Her posture was severely slumped. The woman who used to command neighborhood charity boards with a terrifying gaze now stared firmly at her own lap, refusing to look up. Sarah sat beside her, looking incredibly fragile. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. The designer handbag she usually paraded like a trophy rested forgotten on the floor. They were surrounded by the crushing reality of their own actions. Their discount defense attorney sat silently shuffling his disorganized files, waiting for the inevitable blow. Richard Cole stood beside me, projecting an aura of absolute professional calm. He had orchestrated this entire legal execution with flawless precision. He placed a fresh legal pad on our table, aligning the edges perfectly. We were not here to argue. We were here to witness the final administrative ritual. The heavy oak door behind the elevated bench swung open. The bailiff announced the arrival of the magistrate. Judge Harrison entered the room. He was a veteran of the Ohio probate system, a man who possessed zero tolerance for those who manipulated the elderly or exploited the vulnerable. He settled into his high-backed leather chair, adjusted his reading glasses, and opened the thick file folder resting in front of him. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Judge Harrison reviewed the document slowly. He examined the emergency injunction, the subpoena returns, the wire transfer receipts, and the finalized settlement agreement. His eyes tracked across the confession of judgment, lingering on the signatures my mother and sister had provided just days prior. He picked up his pen and signed the final judicial order. With a few strokes of dark blue ink, he formally reversed the fraudulent transaction. The legal machinery restored the remaining $300,000 to my newly secured trust account. He authorized the property lien against Linda's suburban home, securing the missing $40,000. The financial restoration was legally complete. But Judge Harrison did not immediately close the file. He set his pen down, folded his hands, and looked directly across the courtroom at the respondent table. A formal hearing is essentially a public record. The judge possessed the authority to deliver an official ruling, and he intended to utilize that power to its absolute maximum potential. Mrs. Williams, the judge began, his voice carrying a deep, resonant authority that echoed off the marble walls. I have presided over this court for 2 decades. I have seen families dispute inheritances over miscommunications and genuine grief. But the actions detailed in this confession of judgment represent a profound and disturbing deviation from those typical disputes. Linda flinched, visibly shrinking further into her gray cardigan. She did not dare speak. You walked into a financial institution and utilized a generic medical proxy to bypass a strict spendthrift provision, Judge Harrison continued, his tone dropping in temperature. You exploited a document designed to facilitate emergency health care and manipulated it to siphon $250,000 from a protected estate. You executed this transfer while your own daughter was lying unconscious in a trauma ward, relying on mechanical ventilation to survive. The sheer brutality of the facts, stated plainly on the official record, hung heavily in the dust-mote-filled air. The court reporter typed every single word documenting the ultimate failure of a mother. A testator's intent is sacred in this state, the judge stated, leaning forward slightly. Your mother, Edith, placed specific protective clauses in her trust because she wanted to secure Elena's future. She anticipated interference. You willfully ignored her final wishes, breaching your fundamental fiduciary duty to enrich your other child. You prioritized greed over your basic maternal obligations. It is a staggering moral failure. Judge Harrison then shifted his piercing gaze toward my sister. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut as if bracing for a physical impact. And you accepted those stolen funds to conceal a massive accumulation of hidden personal debt, the judge added mercilessly, stripping away the last remaining shred of Sarah's suburban illusion. You consumed $40,000 of your sister's legacy in a matter of days to avoid the consequences of your own financial recklessness. The judge paused, letting the silence stretch, amplifying the suffocating tension in the room. He looked back down at the signed settlement agreement. The transfer of these assets utilizing fraudulent pretenses easily meets the statutory requirements for grand theft and wire fraud, Judge Harrison explained, delivering the final devastating reality check. The court is typically obligated to forward cases of this magnitude directly to the county prosecutor. The district attorney would likely seek felony indictments, resulting in severe custodial sentences for both of you. Sarah let out a small, pathetic gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. The terrifying shadow of a prison cell loomed directly over her head. The only reason you are not leaving this courthouse in handcuffs today, the judge concluded, his voice ringing with absolute finality, is the remarkable grace demonstrated by the plaintiff. Elena Williams chose to accept this civil settlement and secure the property lien rather than pursue criminal charges. You owe your continued freedom entirely to the woman you attempted to ruin. I strongly suggest you spend the rest of your lives reflecting on that extraordinary mercy. Case dismissed. Judge Harrison reached for the heavy wooden gavel resting on the sounding block. He raised it and brought it down with a sharp, forceful strike. The loud crack echoed through the cavernous room, slicing through the tension and signaling the absolute end of the war. The sound vibrated in my chest, a profound confirmation of victory. The arrogant sister and the enabling mother were publicly humiliated, permanently, legally bound, and completely stripped of their stolen wealth. Richard Cole closed his briefcase, snapping the brass latches shut. He offered me a brief, respectful nod. I turned away from the plaintiff table and walked down the center aisle. I moved with a smooth, steady stride, feeling the solid marble floor beneath my shoes. I pushed through the heavy wooden double doors and stepped out into the expansive, bright hallway of the courthouse. The corridor was lined with enormous stone columns and tall windows overlooking the city streets. I took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air. I had survived the collision. I had survived the betrayal. I had survived the grueling legal process. I was finally entirely free. "Elena, wait!" The desperate, frantic whisper echoed behind me. I stopped walking, but I did not turn around. I heard the quick, uneven clicking of heels against the marble floor. Sarah had rushed out of the courtroom, leaving our mother behind. She closed the distance between us, stopping just a few feet away. I could hear her erratic breathing. She was desperate for a release valve. She needed me to offer a word of comfort to absolve her of the crushing guilt and the public shame that was currently suffocating her. She wanted the reliable, quiet sister to smooth over the jagged edges of her ruined life. "Elena, please," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her desperation. "I am so sorry. I was drowning in the debt. I panicked. I never wanted to hurt you. Please just look at me. Tell me you forgive me." I stood perfectly still, facing the massive windows at the end of the corridor. The sunlight illuminated the city skyline, emphasizing the vast open world waiting for me outside this building. For 29 years, I had carried the emotional burdens of this family. I had accepted their apologies and endured their selfishness because I believed that was my required role. But that version of me died in the trauma ward. The woman standing in the hallway was a seasoned probate professional who knew the exact value of an empty promise. I did not turn around. I did not offer her a reassuring smile. I did not grant her the absolution she craved. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I do not need your apologies, Sarah. I just needed my money." I resumed my steady, confident stride down the marble hallway. I left her standing alone in the echo of her own failure. I pushed through the exit doors and walked out into the brilliant Ohio sunlight, leaving the ruins of my family entirely behind me. The transition from autumn to deep winter brings a unique, isolating stillness to the Ohio landscape. 6 months have passed since the heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block in the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, officially terminating the war my family started. I sit at the expansive granite island in my newly purchased condominium, watching the morning frost cling to the thick glass window panes. The frantic beeping of hospital monitors and the suffocating heavy scent of department store perfume belong to a distant, severed timeline. I wrap my hands around a heavy ceramic mug, feeling the deep radiating warmth of a dark roast coffee seep into my palms. My physical form operates without a single limitation today. The fractured ribs are fully healed, leaving only smooth, unbroken skin where deep purple bruises used to reign. The livid scar tracking across my collarbone has faded into a thin silver line, serving as a permanent physical receipt of the wreck I survived. Resting on the countertop next to my coffee mug is a fresh, crisp piece of paper. It is an official monthly statement from my primary financial institution. The dark black ink displays a highly specific number, $340,000. Every single cent of my grandmother U.S. legacy is safely returned to my possession. I do not simply leave this money sitting in a vulnerable, generic savings account. As a seasoned probate paralegal, I understand the profound fragility of unsecured assets. I spent my first week back at Richard Cole's law firm, utilizing every ounce of my professional expertise to construct a new, impenetrable legal fortress. I drafted an irrevocable trust, designating myself as the sole primary trustee and the exclusive beneficiary. I layered the thick document with redundant security protocols, strict spendthrift protections, and rigid multi-signature authorization requirements. I built a legal vault so incredibly complex and resilient that no medical proxy, no forged signature, and no desperate relative could ever hope to breach its walls. The cash is no longer just currency used to purchase goods. It represents a hard boundary, rendered in steel and enforced by the state. Returning to my desk at the law firm felt like slipping into a perfectly tailored suit. The familiar, steady rhythm of county dockets, probate filings, and estate audits grounded my mind. I spend my days reading the Ohio Revised Code, helping grieving clients navigate the complex transfer of generational wealth. I sit in polished conference rooms and watch extended families argue over dining room sets and lucrative life insurance policies. I observe their petty grievances and their manufactured outrage with a cold, clinical detachment. I know exactly what hides beneath the surface of entitled tears and aggressive demands. The local community in our specific corner of the Midwest operates like a tightly woven net. Information always finds a way to travel, slipping through the cracks of polite conversation. I severed all direct communication with my mother and my sister immediately following the final court order. I blocked their phone numbers on my cellular device. I routed their email addresses directly to a digital trash folder. I refused to grant them any access to my hard-earned peace. But the local grapevine requires no direct contact to deliver satisfying updates. Aunt Carol, bumping into a mutual acquaintance at a grocery store, provided the final, devastating epilogue to Sarah's crumbling suburban illusion. The frozen bank accounts and the public exposure of the deposition transcript proved fatal to her marriage. David is a man who values honest ledgers and straightforward communication above all else. He could not reconcile the woman he married with the unapologetic thief sitting in the probate court. He filed for divorce shortly before the Thanksgiving holiday. He demanded primary physical custody of their 3 children, citing her severe financial instability and her documented willingness to commit wire fraud. Sarah lost the pristine townhouse she fought so ruthlessly to protect. She lost the expensive designer vehicle. She lost the manufactured image she spent her entire adult life meticulously curating. She currently rents a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a far less desirable zip code, entirely dependent on whatever meager spousal support the family court judge deemed appropriate. Linda faced an equally brutal reckoning. The property lien Richard Cole drafted was not a symbolic gesture meant to scare her. It was a legally binding debt attached directly to the deed of her cherished 4-bedroom suburban sanctuary. When the legal deadlines expired and she failed to produce the missing $40,000 in liquid capital, the enforcement mechanism triggered automatically. My mother was forced to list her immaculate house on the open real estate market. She had to pack up the formal dining room, where she orchestrated decades of toxic family manipulation. She had to dismantle the pristine guest bedrooms and the perfectly manicured gardens. The local gossips watched the commercial moving trucks arrive, whispering behind their hands about the disgraced neighborhood association president who robbed her own comatose daughter. The sale of the property cleared the lien, restoring the final fraction of my stolen inheritance. Linda downsized into a small, modest condominium on the extreme outskirts of the county. Her social standing is permanently eradicated. The charity boards replaced her immediately. The church congregation ignores her completely. She lives in total, suffocating isolation, surrounded only by the heavy consequences of her own arrogant choices. Sitting in my kitchen staring at the bank statement, I feel no pity for either of them. Pity is a reserve currency meant exclusively for the victims of unpredictable tragedies. Linda and Sarah were not victims. They were the willing architects of their own destruction. They built their own traps, assuming I would willingly step inside to test the springs. When I refused to play the quiet victim, they stumbled backward and caught their own ankles in the steel jaws. I finish my coffee. The bitter roast leaves a clean, sharp taste on my tongue. I stand up from the granite island and walk toward the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of my living space. The morning sun breaks through the low-hanging winter clouds, casting a brilliant golden light across the resilient Ohio skyline. The state is a physical monument to industrial survival and honest labor. It rewards those who operate with straightforward honesty and punishes those who attempt to bypass the heavy work. For 29 years, I believed that family was an unbreakable biological contract. I thought sharing a bloodline required endless forgiveness and infinite sacrifice. I accepted my role as the quiet, reliable background character, absorbing their demands to maintain a fragile, toxic peace. The trauma ward stripped away that illusion forever. The collision shattered my car, but the aftermath shattered my programming. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. Biology does not generate respect. A shared last name is not a shield against exploitation. True security does not come from the people who claim to love you while secretly calculating your net worth. Security comes from rigid boundaries, clear expectations, and a flawlessly drafted legal document. I look down at my hands. The bruised, mottled skin from the violent steering wheel impact is entirely gone. My fingers are steady and remarkably strong. I survived a devastating physical impact that should have ended my life. I woke up in a sterile hospital room, entirely vulnerable, and realized the people standing at the foot of my bed were far more dangerous than the truck that hit me. They tried to bury me under a mountain of administrative paperwork and manufactured guilt. They expected me to fold. I did not just win my money back in that courtroom. The $340,000 is a tangible asset, but it is secondary to the real victory. I earned my total absolute independence. I forced the people who treated me like an endless resource to recognize me as an immovable force. I am Elena Williams. I am a probate professional. The quiet woman sitting in the back of the law firm was never a victim waiting for a rescue. She was the architect of her own justice. Thank you for listening to my story today. If you understand the value of setting boundaries and fighting back against toxic family entitlement, make sure you subscribe and follow the channel Cherry Drama Stories. We share stories of quiet resilience and loud victories every single week. Stay strong and build your own fortress. The most profound betrayals rarely arrive with a raised voice or a shattered window. Instead, they come wrapped in the quiet, mundane rustle of paperwork, signed by the very people who were supposed to protect you. Elena's story is not merely a tale of a stolen inheritance. It is a glaring mirror held up to the fracturing foundation of the modern family. When a mother and sister stand at the foot of a hospital bed and choose financial convenience over a daughter's survival, we are forced to ask a terrifying question. What happens when the sanctuary of the home becomes the exact trap you must escape? The illusion of the golden child. For generations, traditional American culture has venerated the family unit as the ultimate crucible of character. We are taught that the home is where we learn honesty, fairness, and the industrious work ethic that defines the heartland. Yet Elena's narrative exposes a dangerous rot that can infect this ideal when parenting becomes unmoored from emotional awareness and accountability. To parents across America, Linda's catastrophic failure serves as a devastating warning. In her desperate bid to maintain the illusion of her eldest daughter's suburban success, Linda abandoned the core tenets of family responsibility. We live in a society that often confuses enabling with loving. Parents terrified of watching their children struggle frequently intervene to shield them from the natural consequences of their actions. But funding a facade is not parenting. It is a transaction that breeds profound entitlement. True family education requires the courage to let a child fall. Raising children with a strong moral compass means teaching them that a designer lifestyle purchased with hidden debt and stolen assets is ultimately a prison. If we wish to preserve the integrity of the American family, we must return to the basics. Fairness is not treating your children as extensions of your own ego, and love is not writing a check to cover a lie. Emotional awareness means recognizing your child's flaws and loving them enough to demand their accountability, even when it is agonizing to do so. A family built on lies will eventually collapse under the weight of its own deception. It is only a matter of time before the legal and moral debts come due. A quiet blueprint for the youth. Through the smoke of her family's destruction, Elena imparts a masterclass in resilience to the younger generation. Young people today are frequently bombarded with the toxic narrative that blood demands infinite forgiveness, that you must continually set yourself on fire to keep your relatives warm. Elena shatters this conventional wisdom with icy, undeniable precision. Her message to the youth is rooted in the oldest of traditional values. Independence is your greatest shield. Elena did not win her battle by engaging in a hysterical shouting match or by pleading for her mother's elusive affection. She won because she spent her life quietly doing the hard work. She read the fine print, she built a career, she maintained her own apartment and her own bank account. To the young men and women navigating their own turbulent family dynamics, Elena's stand is a beacon. Do not wait for your family to recognize your worth, and do not expect them to hand you your security. Build a life so structurally sound, so deeply rooted in competence and financial self-sufficiency that no one can weaponize your survival against you. Master your emotions, know your rights, and understand that quiet preparation will always defeat loud entitlement. The Practitioner's Lens: Cultivating the Inner Fortress. If we step back and observe this tragedy through the lens of a spiritual practitioner, the theft of $340,000 becomes a mere symptom of a much deeper societal sickness. Modern American society has become violently obsessed with the external, the right zip code, the perfect holiday photograph, the seamless projection of success. But what good is a flawless exterior when the internal foundation is rotting? From a spiritual perspective, Linda and Sarah were already destitute long before the probate court froze their accounts. They lacked the most vital forms of wealth, wisdom, morality, and inner resilience. When a parent values the appearance of success over the cultivation of character, they pass down a spiritual famine. They teach their children to worship the idol of public perception rather than the quiet divinity of a clear conscience. Self-cultivation is the lifelong practice of aligning one's actions with an unshakable inner truth. It is the profound understanding that true security cannot be stolen from a bank account because it resides permanently in the soul. Parents must embark on this rigorous journey of self-cultivation first. You cannot impart morality to your children if you possess none yourself. By developing emotional resilience, practicing radical honesty, and facing one's own shadows, parents can create a home environment where a child's spirit is nourished rather than their ego fed. We must teach our children that true wealth is an impenetrable inner fortress built brick by brick through integrity, compassion, and the unwavering courage to live truthfully, even when a lie is far more convenient. The greatest tragedy of the American dream is the belief that success can be inherited without character. Stories like Elena's remind us that the most dangerous monsters do not hide in the dark. They sit at our dining room tables, passing the potatoes and smiling for the camera. If you are hungry for more narratives that explore the quiet, ruthless power of setting boundaries and demanding justice, I invite you to follow the channel Cherry Drama Stories. We dive into the profound depths of family dynamics, betrayal, and the triumphant return of the marginalized. In the end, Elena's victory was not simply the recovery of a stolen trust fund. It was the realization that the traditional concept of family is perhaps fundamentally flawed. We are raised to believe that unconditional love is a biological guarantee, a birthright woven into our DNA. We are told that family is a safety net that will always catch us when we fall. But what if it isn't? Perhaps the most profound counter-conventional truth we must face is this: blood does not forge a family, accountability does. Family is not an inherited right, it is a daily privilege earned through unwavering respect and uncompromising honesty. When the gavel finally falls and the dust settles on our own lives, we might find that the people who share our last name are merely strangers who shared our address. And if that is true, you must ask yourself as you look around your own dinner table tonight, are you surrounded by a family that will protect you when you are most vulnerable? Or are you simply sitting with the people waiting for you to fall asleep?